Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into an epic what-if scenario. What if Naruto Uzumaki was raised by the Akatsuki? Imagine how his journey would change if he grew up with some of the most powerful and dangerous shinobi in the world. Before we get into it, I have a small favor to ask. I'm on my way to 1,000 subscribers, and I'd really appreciate your support to help me reach that goal as soon as possible. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment, and share this video with your friends who love Naruto. Your support means everything to me. Now let's jump into this crazy what if and see where Naruto's story goes when he's raised by the Akatsuki. The warrior was a missing nin, seen by most as nothing more than a criminal. He let out a deep sigh and kept walking. Why did they have to do it? He muttered to himself, rolling his eyes and humming as he walked. He knew deep down that whatever his family had done would stick with him forever. He shook his head and glanced over his shoulder. My family always needs a scapegoat, he grumbled, his smile replaced by a scowl under his cloak. I thought family was supposed to have your back, he added, shaking his head again. He leaned against a tree, then slid down it as the sky above cracked with a thunderous sound. The shinobi hung his head in frustration. Ugh, damn rain, he muttered as the rain began to pour down on him. He shook his head in annoyance, stood up slowly, and continued on his journey. I can't believe I was dumb enough to throw myself under the bus, he grumbled, rolling his eyes. Then again, my family only taught me to trust myself. Now, I have to look out for me, he added, cracking his fingers. He stretched his shoulders and adjusted the pack on his back, which held the few supplies he'd managed to scrounge together. A frown tugged at his lips as memories of what had happened flooded back. Where haven't I run into ANBU agents trying to arrest me? He muttered, pulling a map out of his pack. He unfolded it and slapped it lightly against a rail, trying to ward off the rain, though it was clearly ineffective. No, I doubt the Sam would believe me. In sound, he scoffed in annoyance. He wasn't going to lay low in a village full of criminals and murderers. He knew someone would eventually come after him. The first time, he was a reckless, impulsive teenager who didn't know any better. Now, he was just frustrated. If he ran again, things would only get worse. He wasn't foolish enough to make the same mistake twice. If they find me next time, he said, trying to shield the map from the rain, I'll let them lock me up. I'm done running from my family's mess. I'm done being their fall guy. He glanced at the map again. The Leaf Village. Not only was it crawling with enough shinobi to sniff him out in an instant, but it was also led by a Jonin so powerful he could crush the world if he wanted to. Perfect, the shinobi muttered, circling the location. An army big enough to arrest me when they come looking. Hopefully by then, they'll realize I was framed for something I couldn't have been involved in. He sighed, tucking the map back in his bag and heading in that direction. He knew someone would eventually track him down. He was skilled, but it wouldn't be long before someone found him. I just wish I wasn't framed for that damn murder, he muttered to himself, rolling his eyes as he stuffed the map into his jeans. His white shirt, almost the color of ice, amused him for a moment before he remembered that cold had always been a sign of home. I give it a week before they catch up with me, he said, adjusting his headband. He'd covered his face to make it harder for them to find him. It would make it a little more difficult when the ANBU started searching for him. Now it seemed he was just another fugitive being hunted down. Oh, I'm getting a headache just thinking about it, he muttered, cracking his fingers. The shinobi could only wonder what would happen next. Ino drummed her fingers on the counter of her family's shop. It was so quiet today that she almost wondered why she had bothered to keep the place open. Why did I even open today? She muttered to herself while rubbing her eyes. She knew better than to second-guess her decisions. Her parents had told her it would be easy to run the shop alone. Ino didn't agree. While she loved the shop more than anything, it was definitely easier to manage when there were more people around. Handling everything by herself was no walk in the park. She sighed and decided to take a break. As the shopkeeper, she set her own hours so she could afford to enjoy a little time in town. Ino hummed as she stepped out of the shop and turned the sign to closed. Her eyes wandered, and she noticed something unusual by the side of her building. There were faint red stains on the wall. She bent down to study the floor, her curiosity piqued. Dried blood? She muttered, blinking in disbelief as she followed the trail. She wondered who or what had left it. If it was a shinobi, they would have been taken to a hospital. There was no reason for someone to be wounded like this. Maybe it was a criminal trying to hide? Ino followed the trail of blood to a recently fenced-off area behind the shop. What she saw made her pause. A figure stood behind the shop, clad in a dusty cloak that barely framed his face. The blood trail led right to him, and he was clutching his side, clearly injured. There was nothing about him that marked him as a missing knee, though. Still, Ino kept her fingers close to the holster holding her kunai. She was confident in her abilities, but she wasn't arrogant enough to think she couldn't lose a fight. She slowly approached the figure and crouched down, examining him closely. She gently touched his eyelid, carefully pulling it open to check his eyes. They were bruised, and his forehead bore several lacerations. His arms weren't much better. His eyes were a light red, unlike hers. There were clear signs of shock setting in, and his body was limp. He'd been lying here for a while, without any medical help. Ino didn't know who he was, and she wasn't eager to help someone who could turn out to be dangerous. "I can't just leave him to die out here," she muttered to herself, annoyed. "Damn it," she sighed, then began to heal him. She wouldn't let someone bleed out if she could help it. If he was a criminal, she'd handle it like a shinobi should. Ino carefully removed his cloak, so she could begin tending to his wounds. She couldn't help but chuckle at how strange and out of place this situation felt. Then again, Ino lived in a village where the leader had a giant, demonic fox sealed inside of him, and where shinobi had powers that could level a country. The idea of something being weird wasn't even a passing thought in her mind. She tossed the weathered cloak aside and looked at the blood-stained black hair of the stranger. His yellowish-blue jacket was soaked with blood, and it had several deep rips in it. The jacket's original color was almost unrecognizable now. Ino rubbed her temples, trying to figure out who this guy was. Someone either hated him or he'd been through hell to survive like this. She tugged at his jacket, but it was practically stuck to his skin. She sighed and grabbed her kunai. "Out of all the shops," she muttered, rubbing her forehead. There was no way she could heal him properly if she couldn't get to his chest. With a grimace, she drove the kunai into the fabric and began to saw through it. The smell of blood made her nose twitch. It was a scent she'd grown all too familiar with, though no war could ever dull it. The kunai sliced through the fabric easily, and Ino carefully peeled the jacket off his skin. Finally, she tossed the jacket aside, then discarded the kunai too. "I swear, if you bleed on me," she muttered as she focused chakra into her hands. The wounds on his body were severe. Ino didn't want to think about what could have caused such damage, but if she didn't figure it out, she wouldn't be able to help him properly. She muttered, lifting her glowing hands to his chest. She needed to call Sakura. His wounds were worse than they appeared. It made her wonder what had brought this shinobi to her doorstep. But right now, Ino didn't care about the details. She didn't want someone dying behind her shop, and she'd make sure he didn't bleed out here. Ino cracked her fingers as the figure exhaled weakly, his eyes still mostly shut. She was amazed he was even holding on. Still, Ino had seen people survive worse and walk away from it. She wasn't about to let it surprise her. She sighed and decided she'd go find Sakura, at least when the guy was stable enough to survive on his own. Ino felt the figure's will to live cling to whatever strength was left in his body. She smiled slightly, feeling confident in her training. The shinobi groaned as he slowly opened his eyes and looked around. He found himself surrounded by flower petals hanging from the ceiling. Blinking, he glanced at his chest, which was wrapped in dozens of bandages. He then raised his hand to his face and realized that one of his eyes was also covered in a bandage. "I was wondering when you'd wake up," a voice said, drawing his attention. He looked around the room, trying to locate the source of the voice. "You were almost dead out there." The shinobi rubbed his temples, wincing in pain. "Ow!" he muttered as he slowly tried to rise, but his head felt foggy. "My head is killing me," he mumbled, taking in his surroundings. Before him stood a woman wearing a purple blouse and an apron skirt that shimmered with the same shade of purple as the flowers around her. She had her hair tied up in a ponytail and gazed at him with clear, crystal blue eyes. "Where am I?" the shinobi asked, his voice hoarse as he looked around. He was surrounded by flowers that seemed to blanket him. "Nope, not how this is going to work," the girl replied as she walked around and took a seat in front of him. You answer my questions first, then I'll answer yours. She leaned forward, her gaze intense as she stared him down. The shinobi sighed. He couldn't feel his legs, so there was no way he could flee, and judging by the forehead protector wrapped around her waist, he knew she was a shinobi. With the state of his body, there was no way he could take her in a fight. He cursed under his breath and gritted his teeth, drawing all the strength he could to nod. Okay, that's fair, he muttered, wincing in pain. What's your name? The girl asked. Mario, he answered, his voice weak. He turned his head to the side. Mario Matsu, he added, gritting his teeth as more pain shot through his body. The girl didn't seem surprised by the name, nor did she show any sign of fear. She simply walked back to the counter and grabbed something. It was his forehead protector. She ran a finger over the cold metal before glancing back down at him. The symbol on the metal, a boulder, was something she recognized. You're from Stone? Ino asked, her voice now edged with suspicion as she held a kunai under his throat. Mario grunted sharply in response. Yes, Mario replied with a sigh. Now you're going to kill me, right? He looked up at Ino. Ino blinked and studied his bright red eyes before moving the kunai an inch away. Why would I kill you? She asked, raising an eyebrow. You're missing mean, right? She added, causing Mario to sigh again. Complicated, Mario muttered. It's not easy to explain. It would take a while, he said, taking a deep breath. Ino sighed and glanced at the door. She knew Sakura would be back soon, but she didn't want to move Mario in his condition and risk him dying. Despite her instincts, she wasn't about to kill someone without all the facts. I have time, Ino said, her gaze fixed on Mario. Start talking. I'm not going to go easy on you just because you're injured. She leaned down, eyes narrowed. Mario studied her for a moment before speaking. Would you like me to start with why I've been running? Or what my parents have to do with that, Mark? He asked. Because as I told you, it's a longer story than you think. Ino said nothing, though her curiosity seemed piqued by his words. Can I ask one question before I tell you everything? Mario asked, his voice laced with pain. Ino said nothing, but gave him a slight glare. One, she said firmly, causing Mario to smirk slightly. What's your name? He asked, his grin faltering as another wave of pain hit his chest. Ino straightened up for a moment, exhaling before answering. Ino, she said. That's a nice name, Mario commented weakly before coughing. Ino quickly moved aside as blood spilled from his lips. Damn it, Ino muttered as he wiped his mouth. You're bleeding internally. I'm going to have to, she began to say, but Mario's eyes fluttered shut before she could finish. Ino shook him gently, but it was no use. He was slipping into shock. Damn it, she cursed under her breath, dropping the kunai to the ground. She placed her hands on his chest, her chakra flowing into him. No, you're not dying on me? Ino hissed, focusing all her energy on healing his wounds. Mario groaned in pain, his eyes briefly opening before closing again. Ino was so focused on healing him that she didn't notice the door open behind her. Sakura stopped in her tracks as she saw the situation. She rushed to Mario's side. Damn it, Ino! Sakura exclaimed as she knelt beside him. I told you to call me if something happened. She glared at Ino before turning her attention to Mario. Not exactly easy when I'm busy. Forehead. Ino snapped, still pressing her hands to Mario's chest. Mario grunted in pain as Sakura added her chakra to help heal him. Ino sighed, knowing she couldn't tell Sakura everything right now without risking their patient bleeding out. He's got internal injuries, Ino stated as she continued her work, and Sakura nodded in response. I'm going to keep him stabilized for now, Ino added, and Sakura gave her a nod of agreement. Ino didn't know what Mario wanted or whether he was a good person. But for now, that would have to wait. Mario grunted as his eyes slowly began to flutter open. His head was ringing like a bell, and he could feel the sharp sting of multiple stab wounds across his body. It felt like he'd been torn apart and then hastily stitched back together. Ow! Mario muttered, glancing down to find his chest covered in blood-soaked bandages, soaked and layered with more bandages. He couldn't see out of his other eye, and his body ached with enough pain to leave him paralyzed. Well, I can rule out being dead, Unless the afterlife is all pain, Mario thought to himself as he groaned and tried to look over his shoulder. That movement sent a jolt of agony shooting through his body. Grunting, he noticed his left arm hung limply at his side while the other was wrapped and elevated in the air. "Hey, Mario," he heard, making him turn his head toward the door. Ino stood there, holding a plant in her hands. Mario raised an eyebrow as she walked into the room and sat beside him. "How am I still alive?" Mario asked, wincing as he spoke. "I feel like a walking corpse." "Ow, why didn't you just kill me?" Mario questioned, looking away in confusion and pain. Ino was taken aback by the question, but quickly recalled how resigned he had seemed to death earlier. He didn't want to fight her, even though he had the strength to lift his arms and attack if he wanted to. "I didn't want to kill you," Ino said, turning to look at Mario, who was struggling to sit up and still appeared baffled by how he was even alive. Part of Mario wondered if Ino was just keeping him alive to interrogate him. But as he met her gaze through his injured eye, he saw something different. There was compassion in her expression, the look of someone who knew he was too injured to do anything, and she wasn't seeing him as a mere enemy to defeat. "You wanted to kill you that badly?" Ino asked, her voice sharp. "Why? Do you care so little about yourself that you'd throw your life away?" she hissed, glaring at him. Mario sighed and glanced down at his battered arms, knowing full well they would take months to heal. "People want me dead or captured for something I didn't do," Mario said, his voice low as his eyes narrowed in anger. He clenched his bloodied fingers. "I'd rather die at the hands of someone who doesn't have to carry that burden. Plus, I expect you to kill me. Shinobi don't hesitate. They deal with enemies swiftly." He leaned back and stared at the ceiling, seemingly lost in thought. Mario knew Ino was a powerful kunoichi, far stronger than him. He also knew that in another fight, she'd easily end him. It almost amused him how powerless he felt now. Ino studied the near-death shinobi. She could easily kill him, report him to the ANBU, and claim the bounty. But she wasn't cold-blooded enough to kill someone without understanding why they were in this situation and whether they deserve mercy. "Did you kill someone?" Ino asked, moving closer. Mario hummed thoughtfully. "The only people I'd kill are those who deserve it," he replied, then looked at Ino with a distant expression. "But to answer your question, no, I didn't. My parents killed someone I didn't want to kill, and then used me as a scapegoat. Instead of fighting to defend myself, I chose to leave. I know the ENBU will come after me, but I don't want to fight them. I don't want to spill more blood when there's already been too much." Ino hummed as she processed his words. She wasn't sure whether to trust him, but the way he spoke made her believe he wasn't lying. Still, she needed more time to think about it, and she didn't want to risk his life by pressing him for answers too quickly. "So, what do you plan to do now?" Ino asked, crossing her arms. Mario looked around the room, his gaze distant. "Find somewhere to die without bothering anyone," Mario replied, shaking his head. "If they come after me, there will be a fight. I don't want that. I don't want to kill anyone. And even if I surrendered, there's no proof that I didn't do what they framed me for. There's no place for me in this world anymore. And I'm starting to wonder if there ever will be." Ino was silent as she thought. She could tell he wasn't lying, but she didn't know what to do about it. Reporting this to the Hokage was tempting, but this situation was personal, and it hadn't yet affected the village at large. "I'll be back tomorrow," Ino finally said. Mario hummed, intrigued by what she would do next. "We'll talk more then." "And Mario," Ino added, looking at him with a more serious expression. Mario met her gaze, curious about her next words. He wasn't sure where this would go, but he knew it wasn't the end of their interaction. Ino paused for a moment before speaking again. "I have a jutsu that can tell if you're telling the truth or not," she said as she turned to leave. Mario heard Ino before he saw her. The soft footsteps of the florist signaled her arrival. "Afraid I'll disappear?" Mario asked as Ino took a seat next to his bed. "Very funny," Ino replied, resting a hand gently on his temples. "You still look like you fought a tailed beast. Your concussion's gone, right?" she asked, her eyes scanning his face. Mario nodded. "Somewhat, yeah," Mario answered, turning his head slightly. "I still feel like I've been broken in half." The pain comes and goes, to be honest. He hummed and turned to look to the side. And you've been resting? Ino asked, her tone concerned. Not like I have any reason to do anything else right now. Mario muttered, glancing at Ino with his good eye. How are you holding up? Was business bad today? Mario asked, tapping the fingers of his casted arm. Do you remember what I told you last night about the jutsu? Ino asked, tracing her finger over the bruise around his eye. The one that lets you look through my mind? Mario responded, causing Ino to nod. What about it? You planning to use it to look into my head? Mario said, which was met by another nod from her. I just want to warn you. Mario began, sighing as he met her gaze. Whatever you find in there, it won't be pretty. There are a lot of mental scars up there. Do I have anything in my head that I need to deal with? Mario asked, his tone serious as he stared at Ino. No, just don't fight it too much, Ino replied softly, her gaze fixed on him. I'll try. I'm not used to this kind of thing, Mario muttered as Ino nodded. He closed his eyes in preparation. Ino placed her hand on his face, and Mario fell quiet for a moment. Mario's mindscape. His body went limp as Ino entered his mind. It was a strange feeling, like something had pierced his head, but it wasn't painful. He could hear Ino humming to herself as she manifested into an avatar of blue light. His own avatar was crimson. He looked down at himself, blinking. Well, this is a bit different than I expected, Mario said, turning to look at Ino. Sorry if it looks a little off. I'm not used to people poking around in my head. It's odd. He crossed his arms. There's a lot of bad memories up here. I can feel that, Ino said as she started to sift through those memories. Each one felt like an arrow to her. The pain and suffering Mario had buried deep inside him. It hurt. It hurt a lot. Ino turned to see Mario flinch, then try to straighten himself up. There's a lot to go through, Mario muttered, opening his eyes for a moment. Sorry, I'm trying to focus. He rubbed his arms and glanced around the mental landscape. This was the first time he'd ever seen his mindscape. It was chaotic, memories flooding back, some he wanted to forget. They cut deep, making him sigh and shake his head. He dug his fingers into his head, trying to push them away. Ino, Mario asked, causing her to look back at him. Be careful. Some of these memories, they hurt like hell when I think about them, Mario warned. Ino watched as one memory flashed by. A moment of Mario watching his mother threaten someone, holding a kunai with a cold look in her eyes. Mario was visibly shaking, just a kid back then, as he watched the scene unfold. Another memory. Mario speeding through an obstacle course, leaping and twisting, trying to avoid a teammate who was coming at him with a kunai. He moved with speed, barely staying on top of a pole. Ino turned to Mario, seeing the pain on his face as he struggled to hold himself together. He didn't want to focus on these memories, but he didn't want to push her away either. This is enough for today, Ino said, her voice soft but firm, causing Mario to blink and raise an eyebrow. Mario, Ino called gently, causing him to hum in response. Yes, Ino, he asked, turning to face her. I'm sorry, these memories, they're not easy to revisit, Mario muttered, rubbing his temples. He didn't want to push Ino out of his mind. The pain was constant, but it was bearable for now. He sighed, unsure of what would happen next. Ino straightened up, rubbing her own temples from the strain. Oh, this is more painful than I thought. I didn't expect it to hurt like this. She's digging deeper than I thought. Who is she really? Mario thought, watching her closely. Still, he couldn't bring himself to feel any anger about it. He had given Ino permission to explore his mind, so he would endure it. Mario allowed her to pull away from his memories. He didn't want to dwell on them anymore. The pain was still there, but it was easier to bear when he wasn't alone with it. Back in the real world, Mario felt his memories flood back as he returned to reality. He glanced around the room, his gaze settling on Ino. You've got a lot of clutter in your head, Ino observed, causing Mario to hum in acknowledgement. I'm Sora. I'm not used to digging around in someone's head like this. I don't usually come across someone with so much baggage. Ino admitted, her voice softer now. But I'll figure it out sooner or later. Just don't make it worse, okay? Mario muttered, rubbing his temples gently. He let out a hum and clicked his tongue against the roof of his mouth. With a grunt, he closed his eyes, drifting back to sleep. He was exhausted and needed to think through everything again. Mario hummed and looked at the door as Ino knocked on it. He opened his good eye and then cleared his throat at the moment while looking to himself. "Come in," Mario stated while he looked to the side. "Ow!" Mario muttered and then grunted. "Are you doing better?" Ino asked as she entered and turned to look to the wounded shinobi. "Well," Ino questioned, to which Mario shrugged. "It's very slowly," Mario replied and pulled his bad arm to his chest. "Very slow. I think I've actually heard I could be in here for a month. That's a nightmare I don't want to endure at all," Mario said before letting out a sigh. It wasn't something Ino envied at all. She knew fully well that if Sakura had told someone they wouldn't be healed for a month, then it was absolutely serious. She had little reason to lie. Ino sat down next to Mario's bed while the wounded shinobi turned to her with interest. He sighed and looked at his wounded arm. I thought I was going to honestly die yesterday," Mario stated while he shook his head. "It was a very sad thought, but I doubted I'd survive," Mario stated as he was smacked in the side. "Don't you dare pull that," Ino stated and sighed while placing a finger on his temple. "You're not feeling great, right? Have you been getting enough sleep?" Ino asked, which got a hum at this. "I don't think I've been doing anything but sleeping since I've been knocked out, Ino," Mario joked and smiled as he allowed Ino to continue checking his face. "Besides, I have too much on my mind and nothing but time to question them," Mario said as Ino checked his temples. "And those are?" Ino asked while removing her fingers from Mario's face. "Your concussion seems gone, and your eye should be okay enough to start seeing, at least within a few days," Ino said as Mario clicked his jaw while humming to himself. "And when can my legs not feel like butter?" Mario joked before she flicked him on the forehead. Do you honestly think I'm worth saving?" Mario questioned as Ino frowned and hummed while looking to the side. "I've seen plenty of monsters before, Mario," Ino said and leaned back in her chair. "It doesn't mean someone can't be saved, but I'm going to break you in half if you do something stupid like stop me from helping you. So stop," Ino said with a stern voice, which made Mario realize she was being serious. As much as Mario didn't like himself, he saw little reason to want Ino's ire drawn to him. It was funny, yes, but not something he really wanted. "You didn't have to save me, Mario stated while he turned to the side. "The MBU will come after me sooner or later. I'll rot in a jail cell for the rest of my life. I'm sure my parents will find it comforting since I'm sure I'll never be free. It will be a gilded cage at the moment. Not a comforting thought," Mario said and shook his head with a frown. "I'll talk to them if they come anytime soon," Ino said while wiping at her eyes. "But that still means you'll be under my watch," Ino added, which caused Mario to smile. "Working at the plant store you own?" Mario asked and got a nod from Ino. "That doesn't sound as bad as you may make it seem, I'd rather enjoy doing something serene. Would put me more at peace if I can speak more openly," Mario said with a smirk at the moment. Ino said nothing, interested in if the idea actually had some merit to it rather than nothing. Mario said nothing to actually oppose the idea, interested in the spirit of the idea. "That's not a joke if you want to get upset at me," Mario said, which got a blink from Ino. "I'm serious. I have fought dozens of people before, and battle has become something I want to walk away from at the moment," Mario said while smiling to himself. Ino knew something interesting would be coming soon enough. Her life was filled with one crazy event after another. The wonders didn't cease in her line of work from what she knew at the moment. Still, that didn't mean they were out of the woods yet. "Do you think I'll have a place within it?" Mario said while he tapped his good hand upon the bed. "Because I do, and I'm sure that it will be pretty interesting, if not odd," Mario said, which caused Ino to grow a vein on her forehead. This would take very many years to deal with, Ino thought, but she was willing to invest the time to see that. "You're a garbage seed, Ino said and watched Mario chuckle. "But I'm willing to try and nurture it," Ino added, which caused Mario to chuckle with amusement. "Was that a joke about plants?" Mario questioned, which got a flick to the forehead. "It's nice, it's weird to make, but it's nice. And this will be weird when I'm not put up in traction soon enough," Mario said while he closed his good eye. Ino got up. There would be transfer papers for her to sign, papers that she'd be questioning if they were okay to sign. You know, if one of them comes here, Mario said, his healing eye still not opened, then I'm not going to fight unless there's a good reason. I know they're just doing their jobs, and I can't blame them. I just want you to know that I'm not the monster they might say I am. Mario said as Ino pushed to her feet. She turned to Mario, who already knew what she was going to say. I'll be asleep unless you need something, Mario said while waving a hand back and forth. I know that you don't want me getting up or doing something stupid. I kinda can at the moment. Not when I'm here and my legs feel like paper. If you need to wake me up, I'll still be here like I always am, Mario said before starting to fall asleep, his body going limp for a moment. It made him question what would happen when he was out of here. Would the ANBU try to hunt him? Would his corrupt family just manage to come after him? He'd take that chance. He had a thought that it wouldn't matter soon enough anyway. His past would be catching up to him soon enough. Mario made no attempt to tear off the bandages that were busy getting replaced. He knew for a fact that he would be healing soon enough. Whatever thoughts he currently had, Mario had them interrupted by the sound of the door slowly opening and a familiar voice. I thought they were lying when they said you were being quiet, Ino said while she took a seat next to his bed. No, just deep in thought when it came down to it, Mario stated and looked at Ino with interest. I heard you signed some papers. Are you really considering this? You don't have to do this. You know you can just walk away, right? I'm sure there will be plenty of ANBU agents that want to question me and all that, Mario said, turning to look to the side. Ino shook her head. It didn't make a lick of sense to her why she put so much effort into trying to help Mario. Maybe she was just as damn stubborn as he was. Or maybe she was just stupid. Either way, she was invested in this despite every single bone in her body telling her not to be. But then again, when did she listen to common sense outside of missions and such? Ino looked at Mario, who hummed and laid her head in her hands. She placed a hand on Mario's chin, her manicured fingers tickling the light stubble under it as she tilted his head towards her. Most of your injuries seem to be gone, Ino said and tilted his head downwards. Billboard Brow is right. You'll be out of here by tonight. Guess I'll stay until then. Isn't like I got a lot on my plate to be dealing with. Ino muttered, to which Mario mentally chuckled. He looked at this woman with interest. The same woman who didn't seem that concerned with his health. But her eyes gave away that yes, she was very concerned and simply hiding it in her mind. You're really going to stay here with an idiot like me? Mario asked, rolling her eyes as Ino dropped his head. I must be pretty special then, Mario said while watching Ino shake her head. Sometimes I question just what I did to get this screwed over in life. But I know. My parents seem to hate me simply for being born. It was pretty much written in stone from the day I was born. Mario thought to himself and shook his head. He turned back to Ino, who looked at him, seeming to pick him apart with just her eyes. Mario had seen only a few people that observative. His mother for one, but his mother was a horribly wretched being who wouldn't hesitate to throw him under the bus. Ino, Mario asked, which caught the Kunoichi's attention to turn to him. What's it like being a florist? I know you're a Kunoichi, but I think it's funny putting life back into the world. I'm just curious what it's like when it comes down to it, Mario added while he shook his head. Ino stated while she looked to the side, not knowing what to say for a moment. It's interesting. I haven't met many people who show much interest in that. I like it. There's been far too much death. I don't know how best to explain it. Not without a lot of time. Ino added, to which Mario chuckled and hummed. Mario smiled and looked at the florist. He slowly sat up before looking at her with interest. Mario smiled despite the rest of his body being racked pain once more. Well, I'm not going anywhere for a while, Mario said and looked at his legs with more amusement. I have plenty of time. I want to hear what it's like. Violence has been plenty of my life. I don't want to hear about war, Mario stated before clearing his throat. I'd like to hear more about putting flowers back into the world, Mario stated while leaning back in bed. But if you don't want to talk about it, Mario said, earning an elbow from the woman at the moment. Mario could only ponder what would happen when he got out of the building. Would the ANBU even care about what they hear? He didn't expect a trial if they found him. They had already branded him a missing mean, and Mario was smart enough to know how that worked when it came down to it. You know, if I'm going to speak? Ino questioned and looked to the side. You might want to listen. Also, I talked to Sakura. Considering you've got nowhere else to go, you're coming with me? At least until they work out what to do. Anyway, they're looking into your case now. Ino added, which caused Mario to blink at her with confusion as he realized what she had just stated. Ah, did you just? Mario started to say before seeing the smirk upon the florist's face. He shut up, more curious about her story than he was about his own questions at the moment. The thought did nag at him, however, but he was almost utterly curious as to what she could possibly mean when it came down to it. Continue, Mario stated, unsure at all what to say. Then again, considering how things had been so hectic recently, he could allow a brief moment of confusion. Ino decided to save the flower talk for outside the hospital. Mario slowly hobbled after Ino, her supporting the wounded warrior, who turned to look at her with interest. Where are we even going? Mario questioned, his eyebrow raised. I do want to warn you about something. Flowers aren't exactly my specialty. I've been around them, but I haven't exactly worked with them, Mario stated, amused only to sigh as he hung his head. Ino said nothing. She could already tell that Mario was going to have doubts. She didn't expect this to be an easy fight. Not even close, but she didn't feel like giving up just yet. Well, I could always use the fertilizer, Ino joked, which caused Mario to raise his eyebrow as he hummed. Very funny, Mario stated in return as he turned his bandaged face to Ino's shop. So, are you going to threaten to chop me up anytime I make a mistake? Mario asked, a smirk gracing his face. Ino hummed and slowly picked the key out of her pocket before she nodded. Mario placed his hands on his legs as he grunted. Pain racked his body all over. He was still recovering from his wounds in the hospital. Is it easy? Mario asked as he turned to Ino, turning the florist's attention to him as he hummed. I mean, taking care of flowers. It's interesting being someone who kills people, but also brings new life into the world, isn't it? The flowers and kunoichi thing, I mean. Mario questioned while Ino turned the key in the door, cracking the door open just a few inches. I guess that's not a question you can easily, Ino added before wrapping an arm around Mario's waist. But it's interesting, what caused you to think about that? Ino asked as she and him entered the store and walked to a chair. Just something I was thinking while I was laid up in the hospital, Mario stated and sat in the chair. You think a lot when you can't move, you know? I don't know which brought me to that thought. I guess it's just that I'm a little sick of all this pointless death, Mario added as he hummed and closed his eyes once more. You and me both, Ino said, crossing over to the other side of the room. I guess it's nice, putting a little color back in a world like this, but the war is over, Ino said before frowning as she sighed. Mario could guess that Ino had lost someone in the war. It was almost impossible for nobody to have suffered in the conflict when he thought about it. The war was something he wished he had been more involved in. Maybe fighting a war would have been better than living under the yoke of people who didn't value me, Mario thought, rubbing at his temples as he processed the very thought. When do you need me to start? Mario asked, turning to look at Ino with his healing eyes. I can start today if you want. I'm just going to need some help. I'm not really much of a florist when it comes down to it. I can carry things, but the other stuff? You're going to have to help me, Mario said as Ino started to walk over to him. It's fine, Ino said before a smirk spread across her face. I'll just make sure to carry you every step of the way, Ino said, playfully poking his face before turning to leave. Mario sighed and rolled his eyes, knowing that he had walked himself into a brick wall. He'd handed to Ino for making sure he was both her guest and also her assistant and servant in almost every way it counted. Oi, I'm going to be here a while, aren't I? Mario asked, getting no answer at the moment. Wasn't like he expected one, however. Still, the smirk on Ino's face proved to him that this woman was messing with him, and she was enjoying it. Not that Mario didn't find some amusement in that, but it also hurt his brain simply thinking about it. Then again, Mario somewhat expected this given that Ino was probably not going to simply let him off the hook for what she heard. It made him question what the florist had in time for someone like him. Hey, Ino? Mario questioned as she turned back to look at him, eyebrow raised as she hummed. What would you like me to do, honestly? I know you're going to ask me to work as soon as my wounds are fully healed up, Mario stated while he cracked a smile. remembering what would happen when his injuries healed. Ino was quite curious as to what happened next. She might have been able to read minds, but she couldn't foresee the future. It made her life quite interesting the more one would often think about it. Life was far more interesting when you didn't hold every card in life. That was what made life fun. Maybe have you move inventory around? Ino added, pausing to brush off her shirt. There's not a lot of work to do at the moment when it gets down to it. You'd be surprised how little business we get at the moment. Ino added, to which Mario could only hum as he raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Mario asked as he slowly stood up from his spot and walked towards her. I've seen plenty of floral supplies when I drag myself here when it comes down to it. I guess I expected a bit more when it comes down to it, you know? Mario asked, leaning on the cabinet with curiosity as Ino started to handle business at the counter as he hummed. Yeah, well, there's a lot of people that don't understand. Ino stated while tapping her fingers on the counter as she paused to look up. Can you carry that one plant there? Ino asked, pointing a finger in the corner. Mario turned to see a plant which held brilliant purple petals. Mario shifted his gaze to Ino, who shrugged as he turned and nodded. Okay, but it isn't going to be as clean as you think yet, Mario stated, pivoting around as he went to go and grab the plant in question. Hey, how much do you usually make a day? You just said you don't get much business. I'd imagine that you'd have to have some sort of business day, Mario stated, grabbing the plant under one arm and slowly carrying it across the room. Like I said, Ino said, leaning on the counter as she talked. You'd be surprised, there's not a line of people lining up to buy flowers after the war is done and over with. I guess some people just don't like to be reminded of where the flowers go at the end of the day, Ino added while Mario placed the plant where Ino said to. I'm less surprised about that, Mario said, pausing to look around the shop and slowly sat in a chair next to Ino. And more surprised, not a single person wants to even attempt to walk through the front door, Mario stated as Ino sighed. I guess not everyone wants to visit when it comes down to it. Mario heard from Ino as he chuckled and leaned back on the counter. Maybe, but there's got to be some reason this place isn't as famous as it used to be, Mario added, pausing only to rub at his temples. Anyway, I guess it's time to talk, answer questions, all that. There's still a lot you haven't asked me despite me feeling screwed up the more I think about it, Mario added, looking at his bad hand with a sigh. Fair enough, Ino said, poking Mario once more in the center of the head as she turned. First question, how good are you at carrying bags of fertilizer? Ino questioned, which gained a sigh and a shake of the head from Mario, along with a knowing smile despite this. You're breaking my poor heart, Ino. Mario looked at Ino, to which he could only question what she wanted at the moment. Ino crossed her arms while she nodded towards him, looking down at her feet as she chose her next words. Do you have any place to go after this workday? Ino questioned, to which Mario shook his head back and forth. Then I'm sure we can find something for that, Ino added as Mario started to think about the reaction. There's plenty of places I'm sure that would take me in for a few months, Mario responded, moving one of the plants from the counter to the floor. Second, I do not want to abuse the rest of your generosity at the moment, Mario stated, dusting off his hands as he did so and looking at the floor at the time. Mario clicked his tongue against the roof of his mouth. Mario looked at the woman who had hired him. He wouldn't above her kindness more than he was already. There was too much on his plate to do such a thing anyway. Ino looked at him as she continued to move plants from the floor around the shop. Do you want me to do something else around the shop at the moment? Mario questioned, raising an eyebrow as he did so. There's plenty of work to be done around here, you know? I can stay the night, if need be. It isn't as much of a brother as you seem to believe it would be, Mario added, brushing off his smock and turning to the woman who hummed, her arms full of plants at the moment. Mario said nothing as she turned and began to walk around the room. She chuckled with amusement as she turned to face him, a smirk crossing her face as the flower ninja was curious about what to say next. The small, clean, stark white shop seemed far too small to contain a person like Ino. No, I'll think about what happens when we get to that, Mario heard from Ino as she crossed over, standing in front of the man. If it comes to worse, then I'll make a bed for you to sleep here. You're not sleeping in the gutter, even if you're starting to think about what happens next, Ino stated, to which Mario hummed, and raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure I shouldn't look for another lodging or such at the time?" Mario asked, to which Ino rolled her eyes, giving him all the sign he needed. Mario backpedaled, knowing that she was not going to let this go. That was all the answer he needed. Mario simply nodded and began to continue moving the rest of the plants. "Then plants it is," Mario added, crossing his arms as he rubbed at his temple. "I'm sure there's going to be too much work to do today, however. There are way too many plants here for one day, you know? How do you have so many plants on short notice?" Mario questioned, raising an eyebrow as he did so. "I buy in bulk and grow the remaining ones I can afford to have at the moment, you know?" Ino said, gesturing around the shop with her fingers as she did so. "You have a lot of work to do. I don't plan on making it too much until you're ready for it, but I'm still going to be stacking on more work slowly. You do need to prove your worth and such," Ino said as Mario chuckled, giving a nod as he slowly but surely began to walk around. Today was going to be a big day, one filled with far more tasks than simply this. Mario turned to Ino a moment later, eager to get to it as quick and as fast as possible. "How much work do you put in daily as compared to now?" Mario questioned, pausing to think on the moment. "I don't think I've really seen a flower shop anywhere around here." "It wasn't here, it wasn't there," Mario questioned, pausing to think about the next move. Ino was silent. She looked around the shop. It was one of a kind in her mind. Places like this didn't exist anymore. She didn't know more of their kind that existed in their world. They were quite a rarity, just like the flowers that bloomed in shops like these. "You've been through a lot of war before it ended, didn't you?" Ino asked as Mario hummed. "This was a long war, one where a lot of people died. Far too many people," Ino added, settling into her chair. Mario was silent, unsure of what to say or do. He knew she had lost someone important. The war hurt everyone and everything. It made him regret being a soldier that profited off that type of pain and suffering. "I doubt there will be a war as terrible as that one," Mario said, rubbing at his temples as he did so. "I didn't know how bad it'd get. I know the mercenaries who were paying to fight in the war bit off more than he could chew. I fought in that war for ideals, not a paycheck. Lives aren't worth money," Mario added, to which Ino nodded. There was an unnatural silence which fell over the shop as the two shinobi were left to their silence. Both didn't know how best to answer the lingering question hanging over their heads. "If it's all right with you?" Ino heard from Mario as he hummed, rubbing at his temples as he did so. "I don't know how much I can do around the shop yet. I'd like to rest for maybe an hour. When that's done, then I'll gladly help. I need to make sure I don't keel over," Mario stated, to which Ino raised an eyebrow. She knew Mario was busy nursing the wounds from before. If it was so easy to heal from said wounds, he'd have done so before. Mario was left at the mercy of medicine and healing treatments, something that she couldn't help but pity. 2.5, Ino said as she took a seat next to Mario. "Not a minute more, not a minute less. Also, don't expect for this to happen down the road either. I still have plenty of work to do at the end of the day," Ino put in, to which Mario nodded. He put his good hand to his cheek, feeling that there was more pain lancing up and down his body. Pain that wouldn't go away anytime soon. He turned to Ino, who said nothing for a few minutes. "Where do you want this one to go?" Mario questioned before he raised his eyebrow. "Because now, I do not know how you lift plants with this type of weight in them," Mario said before Ino rolled her eyes, simply looking at her friend. She knew very well that there was some dangerous info on Mario she had to investigate. Still, she wanted to make sure her affairs were in order. She still had friends to talk to, plenty of people who wanted flowers. There was still plenty of business to manage. "She is ignoring me on purpose, isn't she?" Mario questioned himself as he looked to himself. He sighed to himself and continued to move boxes. There was extraordinarily little work that he could not be doing. He wanted to point out that she was not doing much work. However, that ignored the fact that was quite happy to be doing little now. She was the manager and owner of this shop. If she did not want to work, there was not much that he could be doing, unsure of what to do next. He still found it quite funny when it came down to it that she was busy doing this type of work. Mario had known about many things, but it was not like he had not dealt with worse. He was a shinobi. It went against his work ethic to bite the hand that fed him. "You okay?" Mario questioned before he rubbed at his temples. because I do not think I could do a lot now. There's a lot of stuff to be done today when it comes down to it. I do not know how you regularly do this. Mario stated, to which Ino was silent, smirking playfully at her friend. Thanks, boss, Mario stated before he leaned on the wall behind him. You don't expect me to do all of this in one go, do you? Mario questioned and hummed to himself, curious as to what her plan was now. No, I don't at the moment. Mario heard from Ino as he shook his head and looked around. I know there's a lot to do. I do not know what to do next. There's a lot of work to be done. Still, I think you should take a break. The last thing I need is you collapsing in the middle of a shift, Ino stated before she sighed, turning to her friend a minute later. Those wounds are a lot more serious than you think. I heard from Sakura before I came in to talk to you. You're quite stubborn when it comes to thinking about it. Ino added, to which Mario stayed silent, waiting for what she did next. Ino knew that her friend could not simply be done that easily. She had to check with Sakura to make sure his wounds were healing up nicely. Ino knew that her friend was both untrustworthy when it came down to it. And what would you do if you had the freedom to go where you want? Do what you wanted? Would you take it? Ino questioned, to which Mario shrugged, simply looking around the shop. Don't think like that. I'm not a monster, Mario stated before he sighed. At least, I do not think there is a monster in me. My family seemed hellbound in making them think the world of me. I do not know why they hate me so much. I still want nothing to do with my parents at the very least. Mario added, to which he nodded at Ino, who frowned, unsure of what to do next. There was truly little the duo could not do when he thought about it. They had plenty of reason to want this to end, plenty of reason to just talk. Mario liked having Ino around. She was one of the few people who didn't question him, who did not treat him like some sort of monster. He supposed he could not afford to dwell on that now. There were far more precious issues when he focused on it. This was the hand life had dealt him, and it was the hand he would be carrying now. There's too much at stake for me to simply go. Mario added, to which Ino nodded. Then I will stay for as long as you need me. I cannot promise more than that now. You should know that there is very I will not do when it comes down to it. There are a lot of nasty thoughts, sadly. I am hoping that it dies out of this. Mario added before he shook his head. Ino was silent as she looked at her friend while she started to think of what happened next. If her friend was suffering still, it was on her to make sure that he did not hurt someone or herself. Do you have something that you plan on doing when this is all done and over with? Ino asked, to which Mario hummed to himself more now. He was silent while his boss started to kick her feet up. She relaxed as she did so. There were more than enough issues with this problem for her to be on edge when it came down to it. Ino was worried about a great many things now that he could not fault. She was a shinobi, a kunoichi. Any lack of respect, of intelligence and caution at the second. I do not entirely know what to say. I do at the time know that I would like nothing more than to be able to. Mario responded while he sighed to himself. I do not think of my future when it comes down to it. It is not like you. Mario added while he shook his head and he nodded. Mario sighed to himself as he shook his head and started to think of what happened next. There was no mercy within this woman. There was no attempt to tone down any work he did, but he suspected this was also part of a test. Ino seemed like an interesting woman at the end of the day, and he was curious what other tests she had planned when it came down to it. This woman was unique. I'm going to guess there is nothing major planned for this place in the future, Mario stated to himself rather than her. There's a lack of pots and flowers, which means there's probably not a lot of work lined up, Mario added as Ino nodded. She raised an eyebrow and said nothing. She was aware now that Mario was studying her as she was him. He was a one-of-a-kind type of warrior. It was interesting when it came to seeing how he adapted to these kinds of tests. He was smart. She would not lie about that. However, there was still plenty of things she needed to deal with now, and one of them was the lack of supplies within the town. She wondered if Naruto was able to do anything to stop that. Still, she did not plan to take her eye off him anytime soon. Ino was no stranger to people that had hidden their true nature behind a veneer of kindness. Ino had known people who directed their masks towards pretending to be someone when they were not. She risked another glance at Mario, who seemed at ease. It was because he had allowed her to collect her thoughts and left him alone. He did not seem bothered by the task she had given him. How often do you run from the law if they don't know the truth? Ino asked, to which Mario simply shrugged to himself rather than towards her. They're orders. You do not expect them to take your word for it. Ino added as Mario nodded to her. I don't think you trust me either, Mario said with a frown as he did so. I'm not bothered by it if you are asking. I do not expect a lot of trust from people. Not trying to be dark or moody. We live in a place where misinformation is one of the best weapons we have at the end of the day. Mario stated, which got no argument from her. He sighed and hung his head. He was curious about what this place did when it wasn't a flower shop. Being owned by a war hero was something that enhanced who had come here. He cleared his throat and stared at Ino, who busy seeming was to say something that bothered him. She had been here for a longer time than it had been possible. It's calming to be here when not on a mission, isn't it? Mario asked, to which he gained a nod from her as he went. Then it is nice to be here. I like the peace and not being stabbed, of course. This place feels more like a forest than a shop, though, Mario stated while he frowned. Ino said a little while she waited for something to happen. It seemed far too peaceful for anything to last. Still, she had been wrong before. Ino did not mind being wrong on the idea of one simple day with little happening so far. It did bother her, yet there was little she wanted to do about it. Today belonged to the peace, and it was the peace she had wanted for weeks. She slowly started to drift off to sleep. Mario simply rolled his eyes at her while he started on his task once more. The sooner he was done, the sooner she had asked the questions that were pondering his mind. He was at ease when it came down to it. Mario looked at his scared arms, which had been worn down by time and constant attacks from people who had simply been doing his jobs when it came down to it. This woman is too comfortable around people who had been former criminals. Then again, I am not one, and I am not going to slowly start to crawl from my shell yet, Mario thought while he frowned to himself. He shook his head while he frowned to himself as he hung his head. What happened if they had shown up here? Would they try and kill Ino for being willing to try and trust him? Would she betray him to them at the end of the day? This was her shop, and she had the final say on his fate here at this store. There's going to be more work to be done at the end of the day, isn't it? Mario asked while he rubbed at his eyes and shook his head. Mario frowned as he felt ready to fall apart at the end of the day. He wanted to do something here rather than simply run around when it came down to it. Mario had a feeling that they did not plan to move on him, no, which meant he was not going to be able to do much. He was far weirder when it came down to it. He had a lot more on his mind as to what to do next. Then again, it had been a lot odder than he expected when it came down to it. Mario honestly felt as if he was at times thrown off at the time. Still, he had a lot to do when it came to their sort of logic. Ino raised an eyebrow towards them before he seemed as if he had to manage it when he leaned on the wall. He smiled before Ino seemed to ponder what to do next. He tapped on the floor next to him. Ino was a lot weirder than it seemed as he leaned on the wall further and seemed to glance into space as he did so. There was a lot to ponder and a lot on his mind if he was entirely honest. He felt out of control on this topic, yet he supposed as to what to do after this. He had a lot more on his mind than he expected. This was not a wonderful job when it came down to it. He was far beyond on this when he expected. He smiled and sighed before he seemed as it appeared to be. She had put more on his plate when it came down to it. Ino was not what he expected when he came down to it. There was more on his plate when he smiled. There was a lot on her plate as well. It was honestly too much to do before the day ended before he considered it. If she had some hope for him while he was glancing around before he seemed to it. She leaned on the chest-high counter. He was not one to dawdle on his work, and it seemed as if she had expected him to be far weirder as of not. Mario smiled at her before he seemed to grip on his side while he sighed to himself. He was a lot weirder when it leaned on the wall while he sighed to himself. He was a lot more confident on these plans when it came down to it. She had made this a long-term problem to a short-term solution. Still, he had been ready for it, and he planned to manage what little of which he was capable. Their plans had not entirely bothered him, more how she had been prepared for this at the time. Ino leaned back in her chair before she seemed to take in her surroundings. She had yet to hire anyone for her workforce. It had been too much to simply relax. Something tells me you're enjoying this more than you usually do when it comes down to it, Mario said, to which Ino shrugged. Happy to have some sort of power over others? Mario asked while he pondered what to do next. It comes with being a business owner, Ino said, which she shrugged and rested her hands behind her. There is far more to do now that the war is over. The shop has not had a lot of business since the war ended. Ino added, to which Mario hummed. There are a lot worse problems to be managing after the war, if I am to speak my mind. Too many people want to move on, and not a lot of people are aware of how to move on. It is a lot harder. Mario said, to which Ino raised an eyebrow. I'm just a hired gun. It is not exactly something I am used to. Got a lot of nasty looks from people who acted like I do not feel anything. Like I do not care about anyone or anything besides getting paid. Mario said while he sighed to himself. Ino raised an eyebrow at her new employee, who was more interested in the topic at hand. He said little, yet it was clear that he had not been trying to lie when he spoke. He did care a lot for the rest of the people around him in war. And what happened to those who said that? Ino questioned, to which Mario shrugged. Let them say what they wanted. I know how mercenaries are treated. People think we do not have ideals, we do not care about anyone. Do not have any real loyalty when it came down to it. Mario said while he gathered another plant in his arms. It is not true, but I doubt they would consider what I say is true. Does not matter to me, I got paid and then got out. I stayed long enough to help people at the time and properly try and make some difference. Ino heard as Mario placed another plant on the counter. It was a small plant, one with long leaves. It almost seemed as if it was more alive than it had been. The fact that it looked a little withered had been a lot more as of the moment. He had been a little more cautious. On the second, what happens next? Mario said as he brushed off the plant. Ow! There go the cuts and bruises that I had from before. Does not help at the time. That hurts worse than it had a little while ago. Mario stated before he sighed and leaned on the wall for support. Ino raised an eyebrow at him, only to realize he was not trying to mess with her. He was honestly in pain, which worried him. This was not something that she wished to manage yet. She began to practice her jutsu as he leaned and slowly started to slump down the wall at the time. He gazed at Ino, which made her realize that she had noticed his wounds were starting to act up. He tried to hold up a hand, only for it to be slapped to the side as she remembered what to do at the second. Do not. You're hurt. I'm not going to just stand here and tell you to knock it off. I am not that type of boss. Ino stated before she sighed to herself and started to check his wounds to make sure none of them were worse than they had been a little while ago. Still, there was more on her plate than this. She had been rather hopeful as of the moment. She watched as he seemed to raise an eyebrow at her with a sigh that told her that he was annoying her at the time. He shut up and let her do his job as she ran her hands over her wounds. He grunted in pain, but otherwise tried to stay silent as of the moment. She was a lot more as of the time. He was hopeful that she'd accept him. Mario was honestly interested in how she had been able to handle him as of the second. Mario seemed to click his fingers together. He was not going to argue with her, before he seemed to ponder what to do at the time. Mario was honestly bored with her prepared to try and handle at the time. She was honestly a lot better when it came to working. Are you okay? Mario questioned before he tilted while he seemed to tilt his head and sighed. Sorry, I'm just wondering what to do. I'm not someone who had all the answers to all these questions. Mario, before he leaned on the counter and rolled his eyes to himself. Kinda. I'm sort of annoyed at the moment. Ino said, to which Mario raised an eyebrow. Hey, I'm honestly prepared to smack you in the second. Stop trying to be the tough guy who thinks they can handle everything. Those guys had beaten you into fertilizer last time. Do you want me to do something, or do you want something else to worry about? Mario heard from Ino before he pointed out while he seemed to sigh. Take your time. You're the medic, and I'm just a former mercenary. Mario stated before he seemed to ponder while he points out what to do as of the second. She had been a lot more to say before she seemed to point out that there was hope. Mario was honestly pushing her to her limit while he slowly slid down to the ground before she pondered at the time. Are you okay? Mario questioned before she ran her hands over her wounds. Do you want to shut up? I'll shut up if you need me to as of the second. Mario said while he smiled to himself. Ino only rolled her eyes before she titled her head. She raised an eyebrow. Mario handled nothing and moved his hands before she could only shake her head. It was all she could do to really try and properly handle this problem. It was clear to both of them that they had more to discuss at a later date, and both seemed to know it. There was more on their plates than both seemed to command, and it seemed as if they knew it. This talk would need to be spoken of at a later date. Ino seemed to brush off her blood-soaked hands and sighed. She damned whoever had cut Mario into stew meat. Even with the shinobi seeming to step aside and let her properly help him, she still questioned if he cared at all. The bandages she had to get from the local store seemed to almost contrast with the fact that he had been sliced to ribbons. It had become far more vexing for her to deal with this. She had also called the hospital so Sakura could at least try something. The fact that her employees seemed to be bleeding to death, or had more accurately bothered her more than she considered. It had been touching and going for dozens of steps along the way. No, what had become a bother to her was the sheer fact that more had been done by her hand than someone else's. Well, she was both impressed and horrified that she was good to this degree. Still, she was on point enough that it seemed as if she had any real hope of protecting him. It was through trying to find a way to figure out who wanted her dead to this degree. This had been a lot harder to fathom than she expects. Are you still staring into space? You're scaring me more. I terrified you at the time. Honestly, see any big wounds? Mario questioned as he frowned and seemed to look at his wounds. The pain present in his features seemed to show as Ino was back at his side, once more in a small amount of time. She had noticed that the rest of his wounds had seemed to seal themselves up properly. It had become hard to see that she had been outmatched by the sheer scope of his injuries. It was clear that he had been hurt more than she had expected. Still, there was enough on her plate as was. The fact that she had pushed him to try and handle work when he was still recovering had a lot more on her own. It seemed as if she was going to need to handle more work. It had become a lot harder for her to swallow that pill at the second. Are you still bleeding at all? Ino questioned, which was met with a shake of the head. Good. I don't want you to die anytime soon. I still need to check those cuts in a few days. Billboard Brow stated that those cuts will need to be looked at in a few days. Ino added before she sighed and rolled her eyes at her friend. A simple problem that could be fixed with enough time and effort. She didn't wish to do anything stupid, however. The fact of the matter was simple. She knew that Sakura wanted to. It was just that she'd either never willingly wish for it to happen, or there were to be problems that persisted and made it so there was almost nothing she could say or do to try and stop this. Still, there were going to be problems. When weren't there? She had a few thousand more problems on her hands, and now the idea of watching and waiting for something to change. It'd have to be better than this, than slowly grinding down to nothing. She'd laugh if she didn't find this to be insane to a degree, to something she couldn't exactly deal with properly as of the time. No, this had to be dealt with before anything else. It'd be fun if not for the fact that she wanted to scream, tearing her hair out as well. There was only so much that she could say or do to try and deal with this properly. The more time that was to be wasted on this, the more she questioned what to say and do. She looked down at Mario, who was heavily bleeding or had been. She sighed as she realized she'd need to talk to her friend and find some way to fix this. There was going to need to be something that she could say and do to fix this, even if she had to drag herself around, searching every single nook and cranny. She sighed and rubbed at her eyes before humming to herself. There was a lot more on the line than she expected. This was going to be fun. Ino rubbed at her nose as she realized just how stupid she was being. Fun? She'd be stopping someone from bleeding and dying on the floor as if they were rotting corpses. It wasn't fun. It wasn't going to be enjoyable. She was acting as if this would get her noticed by her comrades, somehow treated as if she was going to get a medal because of this insanity. She sighed to herself before rubbing her eyes. She'd need a second. She had made sure that he had been stabilized, perhaps for a while long enough for him to relax. This wasn't life-threatening, and her training had kicked in as a degree. This was far from the first time that she had to deal with someone busy being almost killed in her presence, something that she'd roll her eyes at if not for the fact that she had been a shinobi at one point. War was part of her history. It was something that wasn't honestly going to matter much. These would be far more insane missions that had tested her powers to a degree. This would end sooner or later. It had to end, and she knew it. The mission that she had been on before hadn't ended for someone to expire in her shop on her floor. This wasn't going to end the way she wanted, but it wouldn't end with her screwed over either. Not yet, not without some idea of what to do next. This would end when she had something to say about it, nor anything of the sort on her mind. It'd damn well end when she would win. She turned back to Matthias, who had glanced at her, his eyebrow raised as he tried to stop the rush of blood through his body and out onto the floor. It wasn't going to go well, but he doubted that this had ended well for him or her. She was someone whom he had very little trust when it came down to the topic. There was a lot more on his mind than the wounds, though. Those could at least be stitched up to a degree and dealt with properly. His wounds were something that had scared him to a degree, but he didn't back down from it. He placed a hand on the wall next to him. She made him a question as of the second. There was a lot more interest, which made it come down to it. There's a lot more on the second before at the time. It had come down to it. She hummed to herself before she tilted her head as he slowly started to push himself to his feet. Are you okay? I'm curious if you're going to be after me when it came down to it. This hurts a bit too much for me to get up and just ignore it, Mario stated before he tilted his head. Ino almost wanted to slap him, angered by the fact that he had been so callous as to his own life that he'd worry her like this. It'd not be fair to her, to her friends, anyone who had been involved with this. No, it simply couldn't be done before now. Anything else would be terrifying when it came down to it. She had to be better. She would be better than that. Even if it ended up killing her, she'd be better. She couldn't let it end the way she wanted it to, nor would she. Still, she had to be ready before now. She had to let this come down to what to do next. It'd be a lot harsher than this. Only so much that could handle before now that he had more on his plate. It'd be a lot harder than he expected. There was a lot more as of the time being. He wanted to question what to do before this came down to this. He had a lot more to handle. This was just one of them to add to the pile. I swear if you get killed, I'm going to scream and rip you into pieces before this is all said and done. Ino said before she sighed to herself at how ridiculous this had been to her as of the time being. This had been something else beyond all at the end of the day. It'd be a lot harder for her to understand what was going on if not for the fact she felt well and truly ticked off by how little Mario seemed to care less for anything that could or would possibly hurt or even kill him. Was he insane? Perhaps too unwilling to allow himself to be hurt when it came down to it. He was either far stupider than he looked, or she had simply underestimated him at the end of the day. It'd not be the first time she had done so for something when it came down to it. This had been a lot more as of the time. It'd be easier as of the time before now. He had a lot more to question what was to happen next when it came down to it. She knew it was a lot more to do and so little time to handle it. There was more to this than he came down to it. He had been a lot more curious to him when it came down to them. Still, there was more to do next. He sighed as he questioned what the woman would want before this was said and done. He had to be ready for it as of the time being, even if it ended with him being cut down to it. There was a lot more to handle as of the time being. This is going to suck, isn't it? Mario questioned as she rolled her eyes. She snorted at him with a lot more annoyance, as he seemed to question what was to happen when it came down to it. There was a lot more to do next. This could only end a few ways at the time being. This was going to be fun one way or another when it came down to it. He hummed before now. There was more on his mind to question when it came down to it. Ino sighed before she looked to the side. There was a lot more to do next. This had been a lot harder when she considered before this was all said and done. This problem couldn't simply be dealt with by throwing things at it. This was a bigger problem at the end of the day. This problem could only end in one of two ways. Either she seemed to find him, or he'd break down before this was all said and done before today ended. Still, she had to be done before today was done and dusted. He'd be dead if not for her when this was all over with it. Whatever Mario had been through, it sparked even more curiosity as time passed. This place felt like an interesting pit stop, though, for the moment. Still, Ino was a lot more intriguing than anyone he'd encountered in a long time. She had been through just as much, if not more, in her own way. She sat at the counter, her arms crossed, as if waiting for something. There was so much unsaid between them, so much left to do. You know, just because I'm bleeding doesn't mean I can't walk. I could always go bleed outside if you prefer. Mario joked, cracking his fingers. The joke seemed to fly over their heads, but it was still funny in its own way. Ino gave him a tired look, a sigh escaping her lips as she crossed her arms more tightly. There was barely any control over the situation. What little control she had seemed to be spent on keeping them from killing each other. It would be so easy to make this whole thing spiral if they didn't focus. Are you okay? Ino asked, her voice carrying a note of concern as she leaned back. Fine, Mario replied, trying to keep his tone calm. It's not as bad as it looks. I don't know what's going to happen, though. I feel like I've been cut up like a piece of cake, if that helps, he said, leaning against the wall. It hurt a lot more than he expected. It wasn't like he wanted to be carved up. That wasn't the point. But he knew that Ino could be triggered easily. She was a force to be reckoned with. All that power came with a price. "You're going to make me scream," Ino muttered, rubbing her temples. "Just try to stop the bleeding," she ordered before sighing, her gaze sweeping the empty shop. At least the shop was quiet for now. She didn't have to worry about anyone else interrupting. But whatever had put Mario in this state was concerning. If he couldn't even stand, that made him less of a threat, but also more dangerous, in a way. He could be more unpredictable if he was already near death. Mario slowly managed to push himself up. His willpower was impressive, that much she had to admit. Still, it wasn't like he was invincible. "You know, I could kill you if I wanted to," Ino added, her voice flat. "Doesn't sound much worse than what I'm already dealing with," Mario shrugged. "There's worse things than death. I'm just a merc. I don't know anything about anyone. Not like I could threaten anyone with anything." He sighed, clearly unbothered by his own mortality. He knew better than anyone that he was walking on borrowed time. He was just a mercenary, a pawn in someone else's game. But even that wasn't enough to stop others from hunting him down. He couldn't blame them. He was just as much a problem as they were. Ino sighed, sitting down at the desk, her hands resting on its surface. She stared at him, her expression unreadable. It was strange. She barely knew him, but for some reason, she felt the urge to befriend him. It was odd, really, how he'd ended up here, so hurt, but still alive. "Are you going to be okay for now?" she asked, her voice softer this time. He didn't seem to have much stability at the moment, more out of sorts than she expected. He was clearly trying to stay upright, but it wasn't easy. "No, not really," Mario responded, sighing as he placed a hand on his ribs. "What about you?" He looked at her, genuinely curious. "Are you going to be okay?" Ino asked again, as though she had some doubt about his answer. "No, sorry," Mario muttered, his body slumping against the wall. "I don't know what's going on. This whole thing's just weird." He rubbed his temples, clearly exhausted from the ordeal. It was a question he didn't know how to answer. His mind was swirling with thoughts, too many to keep up with. He cracked his fingers again, staring out the window, while Ino continued to watch him carefully. "I'll be okay, I guess," Mario said, more as a question than a statement, looking at her. He sighed again, his hand still at his head, leaning against the wall as he hummed to himself. Ino was starting to understand more about him, though he was still a mystery. The more he got to know her, the more he realized she was trying to peel back the layers. But what was she hoping to find? His questions about her were building up, but he couldn't quite get a handle on them. Ino was different. She was pushing his limits, and part of him admired her for it. But he wasn't going to spoil the game just yet. She was definitely challenging him, and in some ways that made everything more interesting. "You're a strange woman," Mario muttered, a wry smile on his face. "Are you always like this? Sometimes I can't figure you out." Ino raised an eyebrow, but didn't respond immediately. Mario paused, letting the silence stretch between them. His brain was working, even if his body wasn't quite cooperating. "Starting to regret this," Ino said after a beat, nudging him playfully. "You're a real talker, you know that? Sometimes I wonder if you're worth it." Mario chuckled despite the pain, wincing as his injury protested. "It's not easy," he said, grimacing. "We got a lot more to focus on. I don't think I'll be able to work daily, though." He sighed again, feeling the weight of his exhaustion. "Mario?" Ino asked softly. She observed him, concern flickering in her eyes. She didn't know what to say next. What if this ended badly? What if he didn't make it? There was so much left to question, but there wasn't time to dwell on it. She had to act fast if she was going to help him at all. She put her hands on his neck, checking his vitals, a frown deepening on her face. "I think you'll be okay," she said, though her voice betrayed a touch of worry. "But I'm not taking any chances." She wondered if her mind techniques could help him. There were more forces at play here than she realized. She didn't want to see him die in her shop, but could she really trust him? The risk was there, but so was the possibility that he wasn't just some random mercenary. Mario was right about one thing. He was harder to read than anyone she'd encountered, and it made her question what he would do next. As he turned, she quickly formed the hand signs, feeling her body go limp for a few seconds as she entered his mind, questioning what he was up to. There was more at stake than she had anticipated, and she slowly began to think about their problem. He had no real understanding of what was going on right now, as she felt herself slip into his mind, letting out a sigh as she did. She didn't know exactly what would happen, but she felt herself enter his thoughts. Once again, she was greeted by Mario, who sighed. There was so much to focus on now as she observed him. "How the hell do you keep doing this?" Mario asked, his voice full of disbelief. Ino hummed in response, a slight smirk on her lips. "Family trade secret, sorry." Mario shrugged and glanced around. Hell of a power, though. Could have been the best AMBU agent I've seen. He shook his head, looking upwards. Mario paused, taking in his surroundings. He had no real understanding of the situation, but something felt off. He could sense there was a lot more to question, more than what they had initially anticipated. He didn't notice what else was coming, but he could tell that Ino had done this before. It was either something she was skilled at, or she simply knew exactly what to do. Either way, he had no defense against her. He sighed, unsure of what to do once this was all over. He had no clear plan, no idea how it would end. But there was one thing he knew for sure. They had more important things on their minds than this, things that hadn't yet been decided. His thoughts were scattered, unable to focus on one thing for too long. Ino was a patient woman, but even she knew that if she didn't act now, they'd be in more trouble than they could handle. She wasn't about to let him off the hook, not with all the bloodshed they were about to face. She gently framed his face with her hands, helping him as he stumbled after falling. She knew more about what was happening than he did, but there were still so many unknowns. "Don't die," Ino said, tapping his face. "I know it's hard, but don't die. I don't want to deal with more blood than I have to. And secondly, don't push yourself. I get it, you don't trust anyone, but trust me on this. Don't make me mad right now. There's a lot more to think about when this is all over." Mario chuckled despite the situation. "You die on me, and I'll haunt you," he joked, though the weariness in his voice was clear. If I have to haunt you, at least I'll have someone to keep me company," Mario said with a smirk, only to be elbowed in the side by her. He rolled his eyes. There was a brief silence between them. Ino wasn't sure what to make of all of this. The situation felt surreal, and she didn't know how to proceed. "Your face looks like crap. I need a medical kit," Ino said. "We have to take care of this or things are going to get worse. If we don't, you might not make it out of this." Mario didn't respond right away. He didn't know what to say. This whole thing was a nightmare, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. The only thing he knew for certain was that he had to trust her now. He had no choice. He could only focus on surviving this moment. If he didn't, he wouldn't make it out of here. He wasn't ready for it to be over yet. Ino carefully ran her fingers over his face, tracing the bruises and cuts that hadn't healed properly. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew that if she didn't help him, he would die soon. There was too much at stake. "Don't die," she repeated softly, her hand resting on his head as she gently tilted it upward to look into his eyes. "You can't die on me. Are you going to be okay?" Mario asked, his voice low. Ino shrugged, trying to keep her emotions in check. "I'll be fine. I'm not so easy to kill, but I'm not invincible either." Mario sighed and placed his hand on his stomach, grunting in pain. "I've been through hell, Ino. I don't expect pity. I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me. All I can say is that it's been a tough life, and cracking jokes is how I cope." Ino frowned. "You've never talked about this before. You must be pretty messed up inside, huh?" Mario nodded. "Yeah, but it's better to keep moving forward." Ino didn't say anything for a moment, unsure how to respond. She rested her head on his shoulder, still thinking about what to do next. There was a lot they still had to figure out, and time was running out. "Your face." Ino trailed off, staring at the damage. "We need to get you patched up before it gets worse." Mario smiled weakly. "I'll be fine, I promise. If I don't die first." Ino flicked him on the forehead, her patience running thin. "I don't know what I'm going to do with you." She ran her fingers over his face again, worried about the injuries he'd sustained. She had no idea what they were going to do next, but she couldn't let him die on her. "Not now. Are you going to be okay?" Ino asked, her voice soft but concerned. Mario sighed, looking up at the sky. "I don't know, but I'll manage. I always do." Ino couldn't help but shake her head, slightly amused despite the situation. "We need to get you fixed up before you bleed out, though." Mario laughed weakly. Yeah, I guess you're right. But if I die, I'm coming back to haunt you. Ino rolled her eyes and flicked his forehead once more. Not funny, Buster. Mario grinned, trying to lift the mood. Hey, I'm just trying to keep spirits up. Ino smirked. You're lucky you're still alive to make jokes. The tension between them was thick, but Ino couldn't help but care for him, despite his stubbornness. She knew that if she didn't help him now, he might never get the chance to make any more jokes. What am I going to do with you? Ino muttered, shaking her head. We'll figure it out, Mario said quietly. I'll be fine, Ino. Just don't let me die here. Ino sighed, rubbing her forehead. You need to rest. We can't let this get worse. As she continued to care for him, Ino knew that they were both facing something bigger than themselves. But for now, she just had to keep him alive. Ino wasn't a medic by trade. Anyone could pretend to be one, but the training and skill required were a different story. Here though, whatever the issue was, it would eventually get sorted out, hopefully sooner rather than later. She helped Mario into a chair before going to get the first aid kit. As she closed the shop door behind her, it became all the more clear that seeing him hurt was something she found difficult to process. If you die on me, I'll drag you back from the afterlife. Just so you know, Ino remarked, to which Mario chuckled weakly. Ino was about to respond, but he winced, his body jerking as the pain reminded her just how badly he'd been injured. Maybe it would be better to focus on getting him patched up before they started cracking jokes. Are you sure? That's a big blade wound, Mario said, grimacing as he glanced at the stitching kit, which probably belonged to her. Well, that's a big cut, Ino replied with a snark, rolling her eyes. Forehead said you should have been out of the hospital by now, and then this happens. Sure, of course it happens, she sighed. Forehead? Mario asked, his voice strained as he pressed a hand to his stomach. Damn, it hurts to talk, he muttered. Yet you keep talking anyway. Ino muttered, preparing the needle. This will hurt a bit more than usual. I have to make sure I don't make things worse. And I can't let you die on me. She sighed, the tension in her shoulders apparent. For a moment, there was silence, and Ino's thoughts seemed to spiral. Everything around her blurred, her focus on Mario's injuries, on their game, the looming sense that their nightmares weren't over, that they couldn't easily escape. It was as if everything was on the verge of collapsing, and yet she couldn't escape it, no matter how hard she tried. Look, we're going to be here longer than you think, and this is coming out of your paycheck, you know, Ino remarked, looking down at the floor and then back at him. Mario sighed, clearly tired of everything. He felt as though he couldn't catch a break. His mind felt overloaded with everything that was happening. He was barely keeping up with it all. Are you going to bleed on the floor, or what? Ino joked, trying to lighten the mood. Mario shrugged, silent. Ugh, stay still. I'll grab a medical herb. And if you bleed all over my clean floor, I swear, I'll stab you myself, Ino warned, rolling her eyes in frustration. It's so nice talking to you, boss, Mario said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You really brighten up my day. Ino, though amused, shook her head. I'm not paying you to lie around on the floor, Mario. You're lucky you're not dead yet. Those wounds should have been worse, she said, a bit surprised by how resilient he was. Mario didn't know how to respond, so he just stayed quiet, his body aching, but trying not to let it show. You get yourself killed, I'm leaving you here, Ino threatened, looking down at the floor, unsure of what else to say. Well, as long as I get paid, Mario joked weakly. Maybe if you weren't always getting yourself in trouble, you wouldn't be bleeding out all over my clean floor, Ino replied, raising an eyebrow. She couldn't help but laugh, despite the situation. Mario chuckled in return. Hey, I'm just trying to lighten the mood here. Ino rolled her eyes. Well, if you're going to keep cracking jokes, I might just leave you here to clean up your mess, she said, though it was clear she didn't mean it. Mario smirked. Gee, and I haven't even been paid yet. Ino slapped him lightly, making him wince. I can't believe I'm putting up with you, she muttered, but there was a hint of amusement in her voice. I'm not paying you to lounge around either, Mario. It's bad for business, she added, shaking her head. Honestly, it's a miracle you're still alive, given those wounds. Mario didn't know how to respond to her joke, but he could feel the exhaustion taking over. It wasn't just his body that was tired. It was his mind, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. They both seemed to be caught up in the rhythm of it all, in a strange way, and neither of them knew exactly where it was leading. The situation was messy, but there was something oddly comforting about it. Ino sighed as she reached down, flicking the sign to close, signaling the end of the day. She got back to work, preparing to tend to Mario's injuries with the precision of a medic, not a shopkeeper. "Stay still," she said in a no-nonsense tone. "Bite down on this gauze. It's going to hurt, but I need you to be quiet while I work." Mario asked if she was sure he would be okay. Ino's response was a quiet sigh as she worked, her hands deftly tending to the injury with a mix of care and frustration. "Are you sure you're okay?" Ino murmured, realizing there was still more work to do. She looked down at his skin, muttering about how his injuries were deeper than they seemed. "Damn it, Mario. Shouldn't you be better at this by now?" she asked, though the frustration wasn't directed at him. It was the situation. Mario, too exhausted to really argue, just let her work. He couldn't make sense of any of it. He was too far gone. But Ino's touch, calm and steady, was the only thing keeping him from completely losing it. Ino worked on him silently, focusing on each step, knowing one mistake could make things worse. She finally finished and let out a breath, realizing that while Mario might be tough, he'd still be a pain to deal with for a while. "Are you going to be okay?" Ino asked, her tone softer than before. "Are you okay?" Mario joked weakly, but it was clear he was in pain. "Ugh, part of your skin is still bleeding under the surface." "Damn it, Mario. You're lucky I know how to fix this," Ino muttered, looking down at him with a mix of concern and exasperation. Mario, feeling like he was about to pass out, couldn't bring himself to care. There were too many other things on his mind, too many unspoken words between them that neither could fully address. But in that moment, as Ino finished up, he realized just how deeply connected they were. Even if they didn't fully understand each other, they were both stuck in the same place, fighting the same battles. And for now, that was enough. She would save him, even if it tore her apart, even if it broke her to her core. It all seemed to hurt more and more as time went on, and everything became more annoying by the day, something that was becoming increasingly strange. It wasn't her place to take away someone's ability to live and make their own choices, not unless they were an enemy or had chosen to leave things the way they were. It wasn't the smartest move, banging on the glass, but he knew that. He knew there were a lot of things he still needed to figure out as he hummed to himself, trying to relax, before everything seemed to fall apart again. He looked at her, unsure of what to do next, as he hummed and looked up from his thoughts. They had so much more to figure out, and he hummed quietly again before looking at her. "Are you going to be okay?" Ino asked, looking down at the ground, humming. "More and more things are going to need to change," Ino said as she wiped blood from his eyebrow and gently placed her pale fingers on his scalp. "She's supposed to be one of the best medics in the world, and she misses a few things. Either she's gotten sloppy, or someone wants you dead," Ino remarked, and Mario hummed as he looked up and began to think. "I don't know what to do next. There are so many little things at play," Ino murmured as she hummed to herself. She sighed, glancing down at the ground, then placed more gauze over her own wounds. She was ready to push forward as she slapped more gauze on their wounds. Another sigh escaped her, as if preparing to scream into the void of their situation. They were both slowly dying inside, and as she hummed, it pushed him closer to the edge. The weight of her own pain was too much to bear for the moment, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could stand it before it all ended. She couldn't see an end to it now, no matter how many times she tried. It was a problem that needed to be dealt with at the moment, as she struggled with her desire to rise above it. "This is all falling apart. It's going to take more time to deal with," Ino muttered to herself as she hummed while tending to his wounds. She was exhausted, but her mind was divided. There were too many other little problems piling up. She cracked her fingers as she hummed, ready to break down if needed to face it all. He was so overwhelmed by everything that he wanted to scream into the empty space, but she wouldn't let it consume her for now. Everything seemed unbearable, but he didn't give in, not yet. It amused her, but she said nothing, simply looking down, unsure of what to do next. She brushed the blood off his face, unsure of what would come next. She kept her gaze downward, still ready to scream at the madness of it all, but somehow it relaxed her. "You okay? This isn't going to be easy to deal with," Ino said as she looked down at the floor, cracking her fingers as she hummed again. She sighed, her gaze still on the ground, wondering what would happen next. "I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if you'll make it, given how bad you're banged up and how strange everything is right now," Ino said, sighing before Mario hummed quietly. "You might want to call a doctor or something," Mario joked before getting flicked on the head. "I have an honest question. If you're such a big-time ninja, and I get it, ninjas don't care about fame and fortune, why do you waste time here? You're not the type to run a flower shop when you could probably break someone's head open with one move," Mario remarked, sighing afterward. Ino paused, deep in thought, unsure of how to trust him. "This shop? Damn it, you idiot," Ino said, looking off into the distance. "It's more than just a flower shop. There I go again, being a jerk when I don't want to be. Ugh, maybe you should have just let me die in the streets. I'd apologize for bleeding over your garden," Mario joked, wincing as he realized what he'd said. He didn't blame the scowl on her face as she walked into the back. He was just a mercenary, a small-time guy around heroes, messing things up over and over, unsure of what he was supposed to do. "You're not Scum. Scum doesn't get to live, doesn't deserve mercy," Ino said before Mario hummed. He couldn't understand why she didn't just kill him. Keeping him alive didn't gain her anything. She didn't know what to do, either, as she clicked her tongue against the roof of her mouth, frustrated. She placed a calloused finger on the back of his forehead, gently pushing him forward. This wouldn't end well if she couldn't figure out the next step. Another sigh escaped her, her fingers cracking as she prepared for whatever came next. "You know, there are a lot of things I can fix, but when it comes down to it, I can't figure out what's really going on," Ino said, sighing again, unsure of what would happen next. She had so much left to figure out, so much to see, and still didn't know how to proceed. She couldn't be sure what would happen next, but she would keep going. She didn't know him, didn't care to let him suffer. But she would keep going no matter what, because in the end, she knew the best thing she could do was to stick with him and handle it on her own. "This is going to be fun, huh? Because I just can't seem to relax," she joked, though there was no mercy in her tone. "You starting to think you don't like helping me?" Mario asked before getting flicked in the forehead again. Ino sighed, thinking this situation was getting stranger by the minute. She looked down at the ground, wondering how it would all play out. Something about the situation felt off, and she wasn't sure she'd be able to fix it. Maybe it was better that he didn't make it. Maybe she should let him die. He was too much trouble. But she knew better. She knew that whatever flaws he had, he didn't deserve to die for them. Death wasn't the solution. "Just so you know, I'm going to take a closer look at that head wound. You better not bleed on me," Ino joked, tapping his head again. "Very funny, Ms. Ino. Very funny," Mario replied, before sighing, trying to stay calm despite everything. "I'm trying to keep my cool, but this is a mess. I have a feeling this isn't really working, is it?" Mario asked, looking down at the floor. There was too much confusion, too many questions, and Ino cracked her fingers again, ready for whatever came next. They had so much more to figure out, and it wasn't going to be easy. It was overwhelming, but Ino knew she had to keep pushing. "I'm not going to be able to relax more and more. The more I try, the more things pile up," Ino said, rubbing his temples as he relaxed slightly. Mario paused, smiling faintly, still unsure of how to deal with it all. "You know, I'm almost ready to just kick him in the head. This isn't going to be as easy as you think," Ino said before Mario hummed. "So, what's the problem? Either I die and it's over, or I don't and we get back to work. You barely have to do anything. I don't get why you're putting so much effort into this," Mario said, before Ino flicked him on the head again. She knew he was just trying to get a rise out of her, but she had no patience for that. She had too much to deal with and wasn't in the mood for his antics. She pushed his face slightly, as if to remind him that she was in control here, no matter how much he tested her patience. It was all madness, but she could handle it. He needed to understand that she wouldn't back down. "If you're gonna die, try not to bleed all over the floor. I just mopped it," Ino said, before pausing to inspect his wounds more closely, her concern evident. She didn't want him to die, but she also wasn't sure how to help him. There was too much to figure out, too much uncertainty. Mario sighed, still uncertain about what was happening and how they would deal with it. "If you die, I'll haunt you in hell," Ino joked, though there was a slight flicker of fear in her eyes. "Relax. I've dealt with worse wounds." Mario went to say something, but stopped himself. He knew that, at the end of the day, if he didn't make it, it was her responsibility to deal with him. She didn't want to fail, but there was a small part of her that feared what would happen if she did. Ino was beyond exhausted, but she wasn't about to let it slow her down. There was just too much to see and do, and she couldn't let it all fall apart now. She was drained, worn out, beaten down, but somehow, she kept pushing through. "This is coming out of your pay," Ino said, as Mario shrugged. "That's fine. It's not like I'm getting paid much anyway," Mario joked, and Ino snorted, giving him a playful kick in the leg. "I'm sorry you had to close early today to deal with your deadweight employee," Mario added, to which Ino hummed in acknowledgement. It wasn't really his fault, she thought. It wasn't his or hers. It was neither of them, but she knew deep down that she'd volunteer to help him, no matter what. And yet, here she was complaining about it. "You've done this before," Mario said. "A lot more than I wish I had to," Ino replied, a sigh escaping her. "I was a medic during the war, though I still kicked plenty of ass," Mario hummed thoughtfully. "Hey, I don't mind women fighting, if that's what you're talking about. At least you had something to fight for. I'm not mad at you for getting hurt. It's just a lot of things," Ino explained with a sigh. "I don't think anything is like that. There's just too much going on, and I'm running on empty. I don't think I can deal with it much longer, and it's starting to bug me," Mario confessed. Ino crouched down to his level and gently placed a hand on his face, wiping the blood from his skin. Slowly, she reached for a rag, swiping more blood away. "I'm a soldier, Mario. I've dealt with far worse. I've lived through things I can't even begin to explain, but I won't let this happen to you," Ino stated firmly, and Mario hummed in response. There was a lot she still needed to figure out, but for now, she knew Mario would pull through. Still, the weight of everything was starting to settle in, and she realized just how much she was carrying. She wished the chaos would stop, but she knew it wouldn't unless someone pushed them over the edge, time and time again. There was too much to do, too much to see. Ino could only brace for what was coming, knowing the storm wouldn't be over anytime soon. She didn't even know Mario that well, but for now, she would do whatever it took to get him through this. She would keep going, no matter how messy or chaotic things became. It was the only choice she had. "You okay?" Mario asked, and there was silence before Ino spoke. "I don't know. Are you?" she asked, watching him shrug. "I don't think so, but I'll manage," Mario said, his voice carrying a hint of humor. He knew it was a lie, and so did Ino. She placed 2 fingers on his forehead, gently pushing his face back to check for any new injuries. She had been focused on him, on the task at hand, even when the world felt like it was falling apart. "Don't make me poke an eye out," Ino warned playfully. "Maybe I don't mind," Mario teased, but Ino rolled her eyes and looked away, exasperated. "Don't make it weird. You're making it weird." Ino shot back, but Mario just shrugged, looking down at the ground. She knew him, knew the frustration and chaos swirling around them. Still, she wasn't about to let her friends suffer, even if it was becoming overwhelming. She would face it all, no matter what came next. "Are you going to be okay?" Mario asked again, and Ino paused, considering the question. She wasn't sure, but for now, she had to keep going. She couldn't afford to think too much about it, not when things were this unpredictable. If she pushed her luck too far, she might lose everything. But she couldn't let Mario die, not now. He was too important to her, and she would do whatever it took to keep him alive. "Damn it, Sakura. You're supposed to be the town medic," Ino muttered under her breath. Then she sighed. "If you die on me, Mario, I swear I'll kick your ass," she said, shaking her head as she looked down at the ground, unsure of the next step. The situation was chaotic, but she had to act. No matter how much it bothered her, she couldn't let it break her down. Mario couldn't die on her, not while she still had something to fight for. Ino took a deep breath and tied her ponytail back again, refocusing herself. She could only control what she could control. She would deal with it, even if she didn't have all the answers. "Don't die on me, Mario," I'm going to eat your soul if you do." Ino joked, but there was a dark edge to her words as she tried to stay calm. Mario groaned, his face contorted in pain, but he was still here, still fighting. And Ino was right there with him, doing whatever she could to make sure he didn't slip away. She would keep pushing forward, because there was no other option. He hadn't really paid much attention to what was growing in his mind. But her? She had completely thrown him off balance, and now he couldn't stop thinking about it. "I told you, I'm no saint, and you're no saint either when it comes down to it," Mario said, pausing as he tried to stand. "I'm calm. I'm a soldier, and you're a shinobi. I got these injuries because I acted like an idiot, and you've probably dealt with way worse than I could imagine." He sighed deeply. Mario was tired of dealing with her, tired of pretending to be relaxed, and just plain tired of everything that had been happening before she calmed down. Mario felt exhausted. If life was going to throw anything else at him, he would have to deal with it. He was far too interested in what was going on inside his head, cracking his knuckles as he tried to think it through. He needed to relax, but the chaos in his mind wouldn't let him. He'd been familiar with this feeling for a while now, pushing himself to his limits. But he knew he wasn't going to figure it all out just yet. Pain would eventually help him get through it. He knew that much. He clicked his fingers, as if to signal that he was ready to move forward. He had gotten this far, but it was still unclear how he was supposed to deal with it. Mario looked at Ino, sighed, and then hummed to himself, as if trying to relax, but still stuck in his thoughts. Ino poked him in the arm as she stood up. "I know you're not going to get any worse," Mario said, leaning against the wall to try and ease himself. Ino paused, watching Mario as he slowly got to his feet, wincing with pain. His injuries seemed to be pulling apart with each movement. He grunted, looking at Ino, who stood silent, unsure of what to say to her friend. Someone who seemed like he could handle anything, but was still vulnerable in his own way. Mario hadn't been able to relax, not with the chaos growing in his mind. He had been trying to push it all aside, but it wasn't working. He clicked his fingers again, knowing that he needed to move forward and keep his mind occupied. If he didn't, he'd fall apart. Ino had noticed his struggle too. It wasn't just the physical wounds that bothered her. It was the mental chaos that seemed to have him trapped. "So, what about that guy who put a bounty on your head? You said you didn't do it, but..." Ino started, raising an eyebrow. "And you want to stick a kunai in my throat? I get it. I don't trust me either. I trust very few people," Mario replied, before Ino rolled her eyes. "If you bleed any more on my floor, I'll take it out of your paycheck," Ino said, half smiling as she went to call Sakura to make sure she didn't panic when she saw Mario's injuries. Ino had only known him for a few days, but she was already getting used to his unpredictable nature. She could afford a little paranoia. After all, she couldn't just let him drop dead. She sighed, knowing Mario would be a permanent fixture in her life now. Not that she minded, it would just take some getting used to. But for now, she couldn't relax. Not when she didn't know what was going to happen next. Mario leaned against the wall, wondering what was going to happen if he didn't calm down. He looked over at Ino, who seemed to have things under control, at least for now. "So, what about that guy with the bounty?" Ino asked again, breaking the silence. Mario groaned. "Yeah, I didn't do it, but I can't say that's going to stop me from getting in more trouble." Ino raised an eyebrow. "You're lucky I'm even helping you at all." Mario chuckled softly. "I'm grateful, don't get me wrong. I know you're not exactly thrilled to be stuck with me, but," Ino shot him a look. "You're lucky I haven't just kicked you out of my shop. But I can't let you die, no matter how much of a pain you are." Mario smirked, but he was too tired to argue. "Sit, Sakura will be here soon," Ino said, gesturing to the chair. "I'm going to have to fix you up for now." Mario sighed, slumping into the chair. "This isn't how I imagine my day going." 2 hours later, Ino was still patching up Mario's wounds. She had already used up several medical kits, and now she was tightening a tourniquet with part of Mario's torn shirt. She had her head resting on his shoulder, exhausted but determined to finish what she started. Sakura walked in, looking around in surprise. "What the hell happened here?" Ino didn't even look up. "Not a word, forehead. I thought you were supposed to be the best doctor in the world." Sakura's eyebrows shot up as she surveyed the scene. "Ino, you did all this yourself?" "Of course I did," Ino said, irritated but proud. Now stop asking questions and start helping. Mario sighed deeply, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. But at least he wasn't alone in this chaos. There was still something to be said for that. Mario glanced at her, realizing that the tension between the two women was palpable as Ino hummed, seemingly lost in thought. He opened his mouth to speak, but Ino quickly raised a finger, caked in blood, silently urging him not to say anything. She had no idea how to handle the situation at that moment. She had been silent, too silent for far too long. Sakura observed them both, her gaze shifting downward. She was quiet too, her thoughts clouded, though a strange fascination grew within her as she watched the interaction between her friends. "Just help him," Ino muttered, breaking the silence. "Your stitches didn't hold properly. Or maybe his wounds aren't healing right." Sakura sighed and glanced aside, clearly not in the mood for any argument. She had bigger things to focus on right now, things that would have to be dealt with when the time came. Ino, too, seemed to have lost the energy to argue. She simply leaned against the wall, too tired to do anything more. This whole situation felt impossible to resolve. The tension between them, this fragile connection, was starting to get in the way. Ino rubbed her temples, too worn down to think straight. Meanwhile, Sakura glanced at her with concern. "You know, a lot of people are curious about how an almost dead man ended up at your place in the dead of night," Sakura said, her voice tinged with curiosity. Ino glanced at her, a sharpness in her tone. "I didn't hurt him, Sakura. If I had, I would have told you. Want to know why I didn't let him die?" Sakura snorted, rolling her eyes as she understood the unspoken message. As shinobi, they were trained to kill when necessary, to show no mercy, whether friend or foe. Still, Sakura knew Ino too well. She wouldn't kill unless she absolutely had to. The room grew quiet again. Ino was too exhausted to keep up the act of being tough, but there was something else, something deeper. She needed to know if Mario was truly telling the truth, or if he was just playing on her emotions. It was hard to think straight. Her mind was clouded with questions, doubts, and feelings she couldn't express. Mario's survival depended on whether she believed him. If he didn't, she would force him back to life, make him beg for death. But there was something in his eyes, a trust, a desperation, that she couldn't ignore. She was at his mercy now, or so she thought. She looked at him with an unexpected kindness, a warmth that surprised even her. If he were an enemy, she would have killed him without hesitation. But he wasn't. She doubted it. Ino was too worn out, too tired to continue this emotional battle. She had been through too much already, and the weight of everything seemed to crush her. "Help him, forehead. I doubt he's dangerous," Ino muttered, glaring at Mario. "If he wanted to kill me, we'd be dealing with a corpse right now." She looked away, silent and thoughtful, her exhaustion evident. She pressed a hand to Sakura's forehead, silently reminding her friend of the weight of their current situation. Sakura sighed, knowing that if it weren't for Ino's help, she would never have come this far. They had both been through too much to ignore the unspoken bond they shared. Mario, ever silent, studied Ino carefully, sensing the conflict within her. He was too tired to speak, his mind clouded with doubts of his own. Ino was clearly wrestling with her emotions, unsure of what to do. She didn't want to kill him, but she couldn't let him get away with using her mercy against her either. It was a delicate balance, one that neither of them seemed capable of achieving. "I'm not going to kill you," Ino said coldly, poking him lightly in the ribs, "but you better understand this. I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you. You better not forget that." Mario didn't respond, his thoughts a jumble of confusion and fear. He didn't deserve her kindness, but he wasn't sure how to feel about it either. Ino sighed deeply, frustration clouding her mind. It was clear they were both stubborn, locked in a silent struggle neither was willing to back down from. Ino didn't want to be the one to end it, but she also couldn't bear to see Mario suffer if there was another way. "If someone wanted to kill me, they could have done it by now," Mario said, his voice barely a whisper. "There's a box cutter right there." Ino cracked a small smile at his dark humor, but it was fleeting. She still scowled at him, though it was clear she wasn't as bothered by his words as she had been moments ago. Despite everything, There was a sense of mutual understanding between them. They were both tired of the games, tired of the pain, tired of the war. But they couldn't afford to rest yet. Too many questions remained unanswered, and neither of them knew what would happen next. But one thing was certain. They were both stubborn, and neither was going to give up easily. Ino poked Mario in the ribs again, reminding him that she could kill him if she wanted to, but she had no reason to. She didn't want to let him suffer, but there were things that needed to be fixed first. "You're not the only one with things on the line," Ino muttered under her breath. "I'll figure it out, but don't think this is over." Mario didn't answer, his mind too clouded with questions of his own. Both of them were stuck in a cycle they didn't fully understand, and the path forward remained unclear. "Just don't make me regret this," Ino said quietly, her hand lingering on his arm for a moment before she pulled away. Mario didn't speak, but the weight of their silence said everything. They were both too tired to keep pretending everything was okay. And so, they waited. Ino appeared to be lost in thought, trying to process everything happening around her. She didn't want to dwell on the thoughts building in her mind, so she shifted her gaze to the side. She seemed to be strategizing her next move, then paused to consider other options. A small smile crept across her face as she relaxed, hoping for a moment of peace. Mario was going to survive, and that thought brought a sense of relief. Ino, despite the tension, felt an urge to unwind. "Do you need me for anything? Am I okay?" Mario asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Ino sighed in response. She tapped her fingers against her arms, clearly unsure of her own feelings. Looking away, she found herself at a loss for words. What was her relationship with Mario now? It was all so complicated, and yet she just wanted to relax. If Ino had her way, she'd wash her hands of the situation once and for all. But not right now. Right now, she just needed some rest. She thought of it like a flower, something fragile, growing slowly into something beautiful. Ino smiled as she watched Mario grunt, cracking his knuckles and leaning against the railing. "There's a bigger question you haven't answered," she said, turning toward him. "Why do they want you dead so badly? I know I won't get answers from them, but I need them, Mario. And I need them now." She poked him playfully in the nose before settling into a tired position, tucking her legs beneath her. It was clear she didn't have all the answers. She was dealing with massive ideas, all of them crashing together in her mind. Ino longed to relax, to escape, but she knew she couldn't. She couldn't just leave things as they were. It was time to move forward step by step. For now, though, she was going to find some peace. She watched Mario crack his fingers again. The scars on his body were a testament to the struggles he'd faced, and it was becoming harder for Ino to process it all. Yet she couldn't help but be intrigued. She wasn't sure where this was going, but she knew she couldn't just ignore it. Exhausted, Ino wanted to give up, but she wouldn't. She wouldn't bend or break. There was no way out, no easy solution. All she could do was keep moving forward, acting when the time came. "Do anything crazy, and I'll stab you, Mario," she warned, half joking, though her tone was serious. She wasn't angry with him, though. She understood, but it still didn't make the situation any easier. She didn't know what the next mission would bring. Everything felt too uncertain, but for now, she just needed to rest. Ino thought about taking a break, maybe using her vacation to get away from it all. She snorted at the idea, exhausted from everything. "You know, I really need a break," she muttered, her tone tired. She could only sigh as Mario rolled his eyes at her. She found it amusing, even though she was completely drained. The tension was building. She could only think of how everything had gotten so complicated. There was no escaping it now. All the issues, all the challenges, they had to be faced head-on, no matter how tired she was. Ino wanted to relax, but it wasn't that simple. The idea of it all was harder to grasp, but she had no choice but to keep going. Her curiosity kept pulling her forward, even when it felt overwhelming. As she looked down at the ground, lost in her thoughts, she couldn't help but feel like she was in a very different place than before. Everything had shifted, and now things felt more complicated than ever. She was tired, too tired. Yet, she knew she couldn't stop. Ino glanced at Mario, frustration building inside her. There was so much about him she didn't understand, and it left her feeling a mix of empathy and annoyance. Do something stupid, and I'll strangle you, Ino said, though her voice softened with exhaustion. Mario hummed in response, not taking her threats seriously. Feels so loved, he remarked, but there was a hint of humor in his voice. Ino snorted, realizing Mario was dealing with his own set of struggles. As much as she wanted to smack him for being difficult, she couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she ran her fingers through his hair, an act of strange comfort in the midst of everything. He may not have enjoyed it, but it felt like the only thing she could do in that moment. She didn't know him well enough to understand what was going on, but she knew one thing for sure. He wasn't lying. Ino paused, reflecting on everything that had happened. There was empathy inside her, but it was wrapped in confusion. She and Mario were in completely different places, and that difference made everything harder to understand. She wasn't sure how things would turn out, but one thing was clear. She couldn't just walk away from this. No matter how strange it all seemed, she had to keep going. Now, she just wanted to relax for good. That had become harder with each passing moment, something that had felt increasingly difficult. She had been too focused on it lately. Something inside her felt drained now. It had become harder and harder for her to unwind. Both of them could easily be brought down. The weight of it all was growing with every second. Every little reason was making it harder to breathe. Something about Ino made Mario uneasy. There was something in them both that made everything too simple to handle. It was a curse they carried, a part of who they were and what they were doing. It was a tough pill to swallow. Something inside her had snapped, and what was left wasn't easy to face. She was scaring him, but not in a playful way. Maybe it had once been amusing, but that had all been broken for now. It was tough, but not impossible to manage. An idea like this had once been fun, relaxing, though Mario didn't want to believe it. It felt too strange. They were both soldiers, both acting in sync. They were warriors, strong and skilled, but neither of them really knew each other. There was something about all of this, the fact that, for the moment, they were warriors. Do you ever think about the work you've had to deal with? Mario heard, and before she could respond, she looked down at the ground. Everything felt so interesting right now. They just acted, and it was clear they were worlds apart. I don't know, something we've been dealing with for so long. We've had a lot to handle, and I don't know what's coming next. They love to chase us, and you know ghosts don't quit, Mario said. That was true. People kept coming after them. Being kind didn't always end well. They knew better than to relax, to feel safe. She understood him and guessed that he was too worn out to think, much less act. It had become tiring now. It was curious how it had ended up like this. Ino didn't hold anything against Mario. He was amused, and for good reason. He had worked hard, and for good reason. But something about her had become too relaxed, too eager to act a certain way. It was through this that they fought. Neither could escape it. She couldn't if she wanted to, and he was paid to fight, forced into battles he didn't want to face. Even if he didn't wish to, he had to march into fights he couldn't win, against warriors who only wanted results. Part of him would break if it all came crashing down now. He had devoted time to this, an idea that had once intrigued him. Ino seemed amused as she poked him in the side. They both knew they had been too distracted by her, now that they had both been through so much. You good? Ino asked, and Mario just shrugged. Depends on your idea of good, he responded, but she turned her gaze elsewhere. Something inside him had shattered back and forth. He was bored, extremely bored. Everything had torn him apart. Ino, meanwhile, seemed amused like she always did. She was a shinobi, and she knew what was happening, now and before. She tapped a finger against his injured skin, wincing as she touched the bruises, marks that seemed carved into him like tattoos. It had all been too much for him, too much for them. Ino noticed Mario wince in pain, and she realized it was more than he had dealt with. Ino stayed silent. She had been too distracted by everything. It felt odd. Mario glanced at her, and she turned away. She was quiet now, distracted, an idea that hadn't even crossed his mind. They had both been through too much to relax. Something inside them both hadn't been enough to ease the tension. Mario sighed before looking at her, questioning everything going on. And for good reason. She looked around, as if she had become used to it. It was irritating, yet somehow comforting to him. He wanted to scream, but it wouldn't help. "You know you're crazy, right?" Mario heard, and he just shrugged in response. Mario sighed, leaning back in his seat. He was exhausted. He wanted to go home, but he couldn't. All he could do was relax, though even that didn't feel like enough. They both collapsed under the weight of everything. He was disturbed, far too disturbed for now. It was in him to try and understand her. With each passing moment, he learned more. He couldn't stop it. She looked at him with a frown, then wrapped more gauze around his face. He looked more like something out of a movie than a real person. Maybe she was going insane. It wouldn't be the first time she doubted herself, doubted her choices. Everything had become harder with each new idea. They were both distracted right now, and it wouldn't change. It couldn't even if they wanted it to. Something about it all had been amusing for now, but it was also a lot to handle. They both had too much to deal with right now, yet it hadn't yet become something to laugh at. Ino was tired, completely worn out, but she would never admit it. It was just part of being a kunoichi who had to roam the land. She almost screamed, the thought of having to babysit Mario annoying her. But then again, he was her responsibility, her employee. He was someone she could reason with. Mario could be annoying, but she knew he was trying his best for her. The problem was, she had no idea how much truth he was telling and how much he wasn't. Everything about it was wearing her down. But at the end of the day, she was too tired to deal with any of it. Mario was going to push her further, wasn't he? She didn't know him, but she knew he was trying his best when it came to these things. Not that she would admit it, it would only feed his ego. But deep down, she didn't want to know what was really going on inside her head. Something inside her was breaking. It was getting worse and worse. Mario had been thrown off. Now that he had nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, it was clear he had no idea what was going on. He was completely thrown off, and for good reason. He had no intention of letting anything happen to his friend, especially when they both dove for cover behind the counter. What followed were more sharp objects, Kanai. Ino realized as they rained down on the store. Glass shattered, pots broke, and Ino became furious. This store belonged to her family. It was one of the last things she had left of them. She saw red, and in that moment, she was consumed by anger. Mario had never seen Ino so angry before. Not like this. He could feel the tension building as he looked down, realizing just how different she was in this moment. She wasn't someone to mess with, and even if he wanted something from her, he knew he couldn't have it right now. There was just too much going on. Ino roared, more like a wild beast than a woman. But there was nothing they could do for the time being. She sliced through the soldiers blocking their path, her focus completely on taking them down while Mario tried to calm himself. There was so much on his mind. He had been too focused on trying to relax, but now wasn't the time for that. Ino was a force to be reckoned with, her primal fury unstoppable as she tore into the assassins with a vengeance, pushing forward with an intensity that left Mario a little stunned. He saw her friend surrounded by a group of thugs. Mario could feel the bloodlust in her eyes as he watched, and for a moment he thought it best to stay out of her way. Ino hummed as she glanced sideways, eyes fixed on her friend. "Are you okay?" she asked as Mario appeared at the window. "You think attacking a lady's shop is just acceptable?" she added, her voice cold but holding back a scream. She was clearly disturbed by it all, and so was he. They were both exhausted, but their minds were too occupied to relax. Ino spun both kunai in her hands, wishing the thugs would just leave so they could rest. But they weren't going anywhere. They were too focused on her, and she could feel it. She wasn't thinking about anything else, only the fight ahead. Her hands were calloused from the years of fighting, and now she needed to focus. Mario wasn't just a spectator in this. He wasn't someone who could ignore what was happening. Ino knew that. Still, this wasn't just a game. This was a fight. "I know these guys," Ino muttered before letting out a tired sigh. Mario, still trying to process everything, nodded. He knew better than to think it was anything less than serious. They both needed to deal with it. Fighting wasn't a choice. It was a necessity. They clashed with the thugs, pushing them back. The soldiers weren't expecting this kind of resistance, but Ino and Mario weren't your average fighters. They were skilled, they were prepared. The attackers regrouped, clearly surprised by how the tables had turned. Ino and Mario exchanged tired glances. Both of them were drained, but there was no turning back now. "Are you okay?" Ino asked, glancing at Mario. "Not really. Still hurt," he replied, his voice strained. Mario could feel it, the pressure building. He didn't want to think about it anymore. Ino wasn't one to let things go easily, and neither was he. But this wasn't just about them anymore. Ino turned her focus back to the thugs. She wasn't giving them an inch. Mario's eyes narrowed, knowing she was capable of much more than what she was showing. The thugs didn't back down, but Ino had her own way of handling things, and Mario knew that. "You die, and I'll make sure you feel every second of it," Ino growled, her voice low and fierce. Her anger had reached a boiling point, but she couldn't let it consume her. They were warriors, but this was different. Mario and Ino had been through a lot together, but this was a battle like no other. "Are you okay?" Ino asked, her eyes hardening as she glanced at Mario. "Not really," he replied, grimacing in pain. "But we have to keep going." Mario didn't say much more. Ino could feel the tension building, but it was clear neither of them was backing down. She sighed, staring down at the defeated attackers. "If you die, I'll haunt you," she muttered, a grim smile tugging at the corner of her lips. They had a long way to go before they could relax. Both of them knew that. Ino couldn't help but feel a little disappointed, though. There were more battles to fight, and they couldn't afford to let their guard down. The attackers withdrew, clearly intimidated by the strength Ino and Mario had shown. For now, they were safe, but that was only temporary. Mario could only watch as Ino sighed, her exhaustion clear. She had dealt with more than anyone should have to, and yet she was still standing, ready for whatever came next. Ino's thoughts were scattered. The Sobs had attacked her father's shop. They'd hurt her home. She wouldn't forgive them for that. Not now, not ever. She had sworn to protect Mario, and she would do it with everything she had. But as a warrior, she had seen too much, and she wasn't sure how much more she could handle. "I'll make sure this ends," Ino whispered to herself as she rubbed Mario's temples, trying to ease his pain. She wasn't sure what came next, but she knew one thing for sure. They weren't done yet. The battle wasn't over, and neither were they.